The portrait was never meant to have a name, because the woman in it was never meant to matter. London, 1847, had many elegant ways of erasing a lady without committing the vulgarity of cruelty in public. It could be done with a chair, placed 6 feet from the fire, with an introduction that paused before reaching her, with a smile that passed over her face, as if she were part of the wallpaper. At Calder House in Mayfair, erasure was practiced so gracefully that visitors mistook it for order. Honoria Vale had lived inside that order for 2 years. She knew where to stand when ladies of rank entered the blue drawing-room, not near the mantel, where important women warmed their hands, not beside the pianoforte, where young women displayed accomplishments, not beneath the chandelier, where beauty was meant to be observed. Honoria belonged near the window or behind a chair, close enough to be summoned and far enough to be forgotten. That afternoon, Lady Seraphina Calder had arranged a small artistic salon, with the precision of a general preparing a battle. 3 titled ladies, 1 baronet's wife, 1 ambitious art broker, and Mr. Elias Wren had been invited to admire Miss Rosamond Calder, who sat in pale rose muslin beneath a flattering fall of light. Rosamond was golden-haired, pretty, and trained to appear softer than she was. Honoria stood behind her with a portfolio of sketches pressed against her side, wearing a grey gown that had been turned twice and mended at the cuff. Her right glove bore a careful repair along the thumb. She had stitched it herself by candlelight, making the seam small enough for politeness to ignore and poverty to remember. "Not there, Miss Vale," Lady Seraphina said without looking at her. "You are catching the light." Honoria stepped back. The light had only touched the edge of her sleeve, but even that seemed too generous in Lady Seraphina's room. "Yes, my lady." Her voice remained calm. Calm was one of the few possessions no one could pawn. Mr. Wren looked up from his easel. He was a slender man with tired eyes, a smudge of blue paint near his wrist, and the uneasy conscience of an artist who saw too much in houses where truth was expected to bow. His gaze moved from Rosamond's polished profile to Honoria's place near the curtain. His pencil paused. "Forgive me, Lady Calder," he said, "but the allegory requires a figure who understands restraint. Miss Calder is most graceful, of course, but grace alone will not carry the window." Rosamond's mouth tightened. Lady Seraphina's fan stopped in mid-air. "Mr. Wren, one invites artists for vision, not insolence. Then I beg permission to use both sparingly." A few ladies smiled because they could afford to find the exchange charming. Honoria lowered her eyes. She knew better. Charm in powerful rooms often became punishment later, delivered to the person least able to refuse it. Lady Seraphina turned at last and studied Honoria as if noticing a useful object had been left in an unfortunate place. "Miss Vale, stand by the window." Honoria felt the portfolio grow heavy in her hands. "My lady, I would not wish to intrude." "Then do not intrude. Stand." The command was mild enough for company. It still reached the place beneath Honoria's ribs, where pride lived, bruised but awake. She crossed the carpet and took her place beside the tall window overlooking the square. Outside, carriage wheels moved over damp stones. Inside, every eye measured the oddity of a companion placed where a subject might stand. "Turn slightly," Mr. Wren said. "No, not toward us. Toward the light." Honoria obeyed. "Your hand, if you please." She lifted the wrong one, hiding the repaired glove by instinct. Mr. Wren noticed, so did Lady Seraphina. "The other hand," he said gently. Honoria turned her right hand outward. The little seam along the thumb faced the room. The baronet's wife gave a tiny laugh. "How affecting, a mended glove. Painters do love a trace of honest deprivation." Honoria looked through the glass and said nothing. She had learned that poor gentlewomen were punished for need, and then mocked if they concealed it badly. Her father had once owned books, a modest income, and a gentle faith in men who wrote promises in fine hands. After his death, the books had gone first, then the house in Hampshire, then the smaller comforts. Lady Seraphina had taken Honoria in publicly as an act of kindness, and privately as an acquisition. Honoria could read French, copy invitations, manage Rosamond's correspondence, correct pronunciation, mend lace, and disappear when marriageable gentlemen entered the room. Such abilities had value. Honoria herself had none that the household cared to name. Mr. Wren's pencil moved, once, twice, then quickly. The room seemed to pull away from Honoria, leaving only the window, the light, and the strange discomfort of being observed without being dismissed. He did not draw her as pretty. That would have been easy and false. He drew the stillness around her mouth, the set of her shoulders, the guarded hand with its repaired glove. He drew a woman who had been trained to expect nothing, and had somehow not become empty. "Excellent," he murmured. Rosamond shifted sharply. "She looks as though she is about to be sentenced." "No," Honoria said before caution could stop her. "I am sure sentences require more ceremony." One of the older ladies coughed into her handkerchief. Mr. Wren looked down to hide a smile. Lady Seraphina did not hide anything. "Wit," she said, "is a luxury best handled by those secure enough to survive it." Honoria stepped back at once. "Yes, my lady." The sitting ended, though the damage had already begun. Lady Seraphina resumed command of the room. Tea was poured. Rosamond was praised for patience. Lord Giles Penrith, the art broker with glossy hair and restless hands, leaned over Mr. Wren's sketch and made a sound of satisfaction. There is something marketable in sorrow when it is clean enough for a drawing-room. Mr. Wren's pencil stilled. "I had hoped for truth." Lord Giles smiled. "Truth must still be framed properly." Honoria carried a cup to Lady Bexham, who accepted it without looking at her. Conversation moved toward the season, toward opera boxes, toward daughters and dowries, and the stubborn refusal of certain men to marry where they were pointed. One name returned more than once. Lucian Mowbray, Duke of Harrowmere, ruthless, unmarried, impossibly proud. The sort of man mothers feared pursued and forgave in advance, because a dukedom made harshness look like strength. "He will marry when it benefits him," Lady Seraphina said, smoothing one glove over her wrist. "Men of that rank do not act from sentiment." "Does His Grace care for art?" Lady Bexham asked. Lord Giles laughed softly. "He cares for power. Art is often power with better lighting." Honoria kept her face empty as she collected cups. Dukes belonged to another height of existence, like weather over distant hills. They could flood a woman's life without ever learning her name. She had no reason to imagine the Duke of Harrowmere would notice a painting, much less the nameless woman inside it. By late afternoon, the guests had gone, leaving behind crushed rose petals, cold tea, and the faint odor of expensive perfume. Rosamond swept upstairs in a temper, offended that the portrait had not been entirely hers. Honoria remained to gather sketches from the carpet, while Lady Seraphina examined Mr. Wren's work. The drawing was only the beginning of a composition, yet the figure by the window already seemed too alive for safety. "The finished work must flatter my daughter," Lady Seraphina said. Mr. Wren placed a clean sheet over the sketch. "Miss Calder will appear in the arrangement." "That was not what I said." "No, my lady. Miss Vale's contribution is not to be discussed." The words entered Honoria quietly. She was standing near the side table with a stack of cups. No one had asked whether she heard. No one imagined hearing might matter. Mr. Wren's jaw tightened. "The figure at the window is the heart of the picture. Then the heart shall remain discreet." Lord Giles, who had lingered near the mantel, gave a light laugh. "A mystery improves value. Name the girl, and she becomes a circumstance. Leave her unnamed, and she becomes an appetite." Honoria looked at him then. He was not speaking about the painting alone. Lady Seraphina saw her glance and smiled with polished warning. "Do not concern yourself, Miss Vale. No one will imagine it is you." There it was, mercy-shaped like a wound. No one would imagine it was her. No one ever did. Mr. Wren bent to gather his papers. One small catalogue draft slipped from the portfolio and landed near Honoria's shoe. She saw the title before he reached for it. "The Woman at the Window." Beneath it, in his slanting hand, he had written, "Sitter, Miss Honoria Vale." She stared for one heartbeat too long. Lady Seraphina noticed. Her fan closed. "That line will not be included." Mr. Wren picked up the page. "It is customary to record a sitter when the likeness is direct. It is customary for patrons to decide what is useful." Lord Giles extended a hand. Allow me. Printers are obedient when instructions are legible. He took the draft and crossed out Honoria's name with a neat black stroke. The sound of the pen against paper was small. It felt final. Honoria did not move. A name could be removed so easily. No raised voice, no broken glass. Only ink drawn through letters that had briefly belonged to her. Later, after the lamps were lit and the house settled into its evening discipline, Honoria returned alone to the blue drawing room to collect Mr. Wren's forgotten charcoal cloth. The unfinished canvas had been turned toward the window. In the dimness, the woman painted there seemed less like a sketch than a secret refusing burial. Honoria stepped closer. She recognized the grey gown, the repaired glove, the guarded hand. More than that, she recognized the part of herself no one at Calder House had managed to employ, correct, or dismiss. The woman in the picture looked lonely. She also looked unconquered. Honoria reached out and touched the wooden edge of the frame. "At least there," she whispered. "I am allowed to remain." A floorboard creaked. She turned. Lady Seraphina stood in the doorway, one hand resting on the knob. Sentimental attachment is a dangerous habit in dependent women. Honoria withdrew her hand. "I was only tidying the room, my lady, of course." Lady Seraphina crossed to the canvas and turned it away from the fading light. "Mr. Wren will finish the work elsewhere. It goes to a private exhibition next week." Honoria folded the charcoal cloth. "Will Miss Calder be named?" "Miss Calder may be suggested." Lady Seraphina's gaze settled on her. "You will not be mentioned." Honoria curtsied because survival had trained her body faster than pride could object. "As you wish." Lady Seraphina rang for a footman. The portrait was to be wrapped before morning. Every loose sketch bearing Honoria's name or likeness was to be returned to Lady Seraphina. The catalogue note was to read only, "The woman at the window. Study in restraint. Sitter unnamed. By dawn, the canvas would leave Calder House. By then, the world would be invited to wonder about the woman in the window. It would not be invited to know her name." By noon the next day, 3 mothers had tried to marry Lucien Mowbray without his consent. The first had sent her daughter forward in a bookshop on Bond Street, with a volume of sermons held upside down and an expression of terrified obedience. The second had arranged to drop a glove at the exact moment. Lucien passed beneath the awning of his club, then watched with disappointed calculation when his footman retrieved it instead. The third, Lady Draycott, had been bold enough to intercept him in the entrance hall of Harrowmere House, under the pretense of returning an invitation that had never been issued. Her daughter stood beside her in pale blue, eyes lowered, cheeks burning, hands clasped so tightly that Lucien suspected she would leave marks on her own gloves. "Your Grace," Lady Draycott said, all maternal warmth and social teeth. "What fortune to find you at home." Lucien looked at the card in her hand. Fortune is often accused of crimes committed by planning. Lady Draycott's smile tightened. "You are severe, Your Grace. I am busy." The girl in blue flinched. Not from his tone, he thought, but from the humiliation of being displayed and dismissed in the same breath. Lucien had no patience for matrimonial ambushes, but he had less for the women made into bait by families who called ambition duty. He turned slightly, allowing the girl the dignity of not being the direct object of his refusal. "Lady Draycott, your daughter appears unwell from the heat. My housekeeper will have a carriage called for you at once. A public fainting would injure her comfort and your strategy." The girl's eyes lifted for a second. Surprise passed through them first, then relief. Lady Draycott colored. "I assure you, Your Grace, no strategy was intended. Then you have been spared the embarrassment of a failed one." 10 minutes later, mother and daughter were gone, and Harrowmere House returned to the cool discipline Lucien preferred. The London residence had been built for display, but he used it like a fortress. Tall windows, dark polished floors, portraits of ancestors who had mistaken severity for virtue, and servants trained to open doors before impatience formed. Everything obeyed. That had always been the point of wealth, or so he had been taught. It made disorder stand outside and wait. Lucien stood in the library with his gloves in one hand while Mr. Ambrose Teague, his solicitor, placed a small stack of papers upon the desk. Teague was compact, precise, and inconveniently loyal. He had served the late Duke before Lucian, and had outlived 3 attempts to be intimidated into silence. If Lady Draycott was the 3rd, Teague said, I expect 2 more before dinner. Send them to Parliament. It is already full of schemes in need of husbands. Teague adjusted his spectacles. Your Grace jokes when irritated. Then London has made me witty beyond measure. London has made you visible. That is not the same thing. Lucian crossed to the window. In the square beyond, carriages moved between houses that had spent generations perfecting the art of appearing effortless. Somewhere behind those doors, daughters were being instructed in softness. Mothers were calculating settlements, and sons were being excused for selfishness because inheritance required heirs more than decency. If this concerns succession again, make your argument brief. The trustees ask only that you consider the future of the Harrowmere line. The line has survived wars, fools, and my grandfather's enthusiasm for Italian marble. It will endure my reluctance. Reluctance is manageable. Permanent refusal is less so. Lucian looked back. Marriage as London practices it is a polite transfer of captivity. A woman is praised for obedience until she becomes useful, then blamed for wanting kindness in return. I do not intend to preside over that arrangement. Teague's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. That is a moral objection, not a practical one. I did not realize solicitors could identify the difference. We can. We simply invoice more reliably for practical matters. Lucian nearly smiled. Nearly. Teague placed 1 card apart from the rest. This came from Lord Giles Penrith. A private exhibition tonight on Brook Street. New work by Mr. Elias Wren. Lady Seraphina Calder is expected. Of course she is. Lucian knew Lady Seraphina by reputation, which was to say he knew the shape of her ambition without having endured the full performance. A widow of rank-adjacent consequence, a mother of 1 marriageable daughter, a patron of art when art improved her circle, and a woman skilled enough to make calculation look like taste. She has a daughter. Teague said, every woman in London appears to have a daughter at present. Miss Rosamond Calder is considered very pretty. Then I wish her a husband who notices more than that. Teague paused. You intend to decline? Lucian picked up Penrith's card. The handwriting was large, confident, and just short of vulgar. A remarkable study by Wren. Not the usual powdered flattery. You may despise society, Harrowmere, but some walls still carry truth. Lucian turned the card once between his fingers. Penrith is a parasite with taste, a dangerous creature, not as dangerous as a room of mothers. That is not an answer. I shall attend. Teague's brows rose. For the art? For the absence of dancing. That is almost a reason. Lucian set the card down. Have the carriage ready at 9 by evening. Brook Street glowed with lamps and expectation. The private gallery occupied the lower floor of a narrow, elegant house where art and gossip had been invited with equal care. Lucian entered without haste. He had learned that a duke who hurried gave society too much satisfaction. Conversation thinned as he passed the threshold. Fans paused. A young lady near a landscape forgot to complete her curtsy. Lord Giles Penrith saw him at once and moved forward with a glass in one hand and triumph in the other. Harrowmere. You came. You wrote as if refusal would disappoint the paintings. The paintings are more forgiving than people. Then they have the advantage. Penrith laughed, because he was the kind of man who treated insult as intimacy when rank made resentment unwise. Come, you must see Wren's new work. Not yet, though. Let the room warm you first. I did not come to be warmed. No, one hears you dislike domestic comforts. One hears too much. Lady Seraphina Calder approached before Penrith could answer. She wore deep green silk and a necklace arranged to suggest old money, even if the stones had been reset more recently than pride would admit. Beside her stood Miss Rosamond Calder in ivory, golden, composed, and watching him through low-eyed lashes carefully taught to tremble. Your Grace, Lady Seraphina said. London is honoured. London recovers quickly from honour, Lady Calder. Rosamond curtsied. We feared the exhibition might not tempt you. Fear is too strong a word for disappointment over attendance. The girl looked confused. Her mother smiled for her. Mr. Wren's work has caused unusual admiration. He has found melancholy tonight. London adores melancholy when it is safely framed. London adores anything that lets it feel without paying. Lady Seraphina's eyes sharpened, but her smile remained. How severe. I begin to see why mothers despair of you. Mothers do not despair, they regroup. Penrith laughed again too loudly. You see? He understands strategy. Lucian let the comment pass. His gaze moved across the walls. A duchess in satin, painted younger than honesty allowed. A child with a spaniel. A naval officer whose medals had been handled with more affection than his eyes. A mythological nymph, so polished that she seemed less alive than the frame around her. He had seen rooms like this for years. Beauty arranged for advantage. Sentiment trained to flatter patrons. Faces made harmless by money. Then he noticed the quieter corner beyond the second archway. A modest frame. A small gathered crowd. No laughter near it. That interested him. Penrith followed his gaze and smiled. Ah, there she is. Lady Seraphina's fan opened with a soft flick. Rosamond shifted, not much, but enough for Lucian to notice. She? He asked. A fancy, Penrith said lightly. A figure at a window. Wren indulging his tenderness for shadows. Lucian took one step toward the far wall. Something in the room changed, though he could not yet have named it. The painting was partly obscured by two ladies leaning close, their heads bent in speculation. One whispered. The other did not answer. That, too, interested him. Most art in London produced borrowed opinions within seconds. Silence was rarer. He moved closer. The chatter behind him thinned. He became aware of Lady Seraphina several feet away, watching not the painting, but him. He became aware of Penrith's smile tightening. He became aware of Rosamond Calder, standing too near the light, as if she had been placed there. Then the ladies before the frame moved aside. Lucian saw the woman by the painted window. He stopped. Not because she was beautiful in the way London praised beauty. She was not offering herself to admiration. Her grey gown was plain. Her gloved hand, turned reluctantly toward the light, bore a repaired seam at the thumb. Her face held no invitation. No practiced softness. No decorative sorrow arranged for male rescue. She looked as if she had endured the world's disregard so long that even pain had learned to stand upright within her. Lucian heard Penrith speaking somewhere behind him, but the words lost shape. The woman in the portrait had not been painted to please a room. That was why the room did not know what to do with her. Beneath the frame, the catalogue card read, The woman at the window. Study in restraint, sitter unnamed. Lucian looked at the repaired glove, then at the word unnamed. The room seemed suddenly colder. For several seconds, Lucian Mowbray forgot the room was watching him. That was the first offence the painting committed. Dukes did not forget rooms. They measured them, endured them, controlled them, or left them. Lucian had spent most of his adult life moving through society with the exact amount of attention necessary to prevent anyone from mistaking indifference for weakness. Yet before the woman at the window, his practiced distance failed. The portrait was not large. It did not command attention through gold-leaf, dramatic color, or the flattering softness patrons purchased when they feared truth. It stood quietly on the far wall, lit by candles that trembled whenever someone passed behind him. A grey gown, a window, a gloved hand turned toward the light, a repaired seam at the thumb. A face composed with such restraint that sorrow had been forced to become posture. Lucian stepped closer. Behind him, conversation thinned until the gallery seemed to listen with him. The woman's eyes were not lowered. They were not raised in appeal either. They looked past the room, past judgment, past any man vain enough to believe observation was the same as understanding. Whoever she was, she had learned the price of being seen and found it unsafe. Remarkable, is it not? Lord Giles Penrith said near his shoulder. Wren has outdone himself. A little melancholy, a little mystery, a little poverty suggested with taste. London will devour her. Lucian did not answer at once. He read the catalogue card again. The woman at the window, study in restraint, sitter unnamed. Who is she? He asked. Penrith gave a careless laugh. A fancy, a mood. Artists call such things studies when they cannot sell them as portraits. That was not my question. Lady Seraphina Calder moved into the candlelight with a smile calibrated to soothe curiosity without satisfying it. Your Grace, Mr. Wren often draws from several impressions. A hand here, a turn of the head there, a little invention in the expression. One must not demand census records from poetry. Lucian looked at Elias Wren, who stood several feet away with the unhappy stillness of a man watching his own conscience approach the scaffold. Mr. Wren, he said, did imagination mend the glove? The painter's throat moved. No. Your Grace. The admission passed through the gallery like a draught under a door. A lady near the side wall lifted her fan too quickly. Rosamund Calder glanced at her mother, then at the portrait, then down at her own perfect gloves. Penrith's smile sharpened. A charming detail taken from life, no doubt. It does not follow that the sitter matters. Models are often incidental to art. A young gentleman with more confidence than wisdom murmured, especially paid faces. Lucian turned his head. Nothing more. The young man's expression emptied. You will not use that phrase again. Lucian said. Not of this woman. Not of any woman whose poverty makes your manners feel optional. Colour climbed the young man's neck. I meant no offence, Your Grace. Then be grateful you were corrected before giving one. Silence fell hard enough to rearrange the room. Lucian returned his gaze to the portrait. He disliked the anger rising in him because it felt disproportionate. He did not know the woman. He had no claim to her story, no right to indignation on her behalf. And yet the room's easy willingness to consume her without naming her offended something older than taste. Perhaps it was the glove. Such a small piece of evidence. Such a severe confession. New gloves could be purchased by those who had never needed to choose between appearance and bread, between dignity and usefulness, between being noticed for poverty or punished for hiding it. The painter had not softened that seam. He had honored it. Someone else had removed the name beneath it. Her name, Lucian said. I require it. Lady Seraphina's fan opened. Your Grace makes a catalogue sound like a legal matter. Names often are. In this case, there is no mystery worth troubling you. The work was produced under my patronage. That is the relevant fact. Patronage explains who paid. It does not explain who was erased. A brighter murmur stirred behind him. Society loved confrontation most when it could pretend to be appalled by it. Penrith lifted his glass. Erased is a grave word, surely unnamed is more elegant. Only to the person holding the pen. Lucian looked at the catalogue card again and removed it from beneath the frame. The paper was thick, the lettering neat, the omission deliberate. Miss Calder, he said without warning. Were you present for the sitting? Rosamund startled. She had been waiting to be admired, not examined. I was near the room, Your Grace. Near the room is not in the portrait. Lady Seraphina's voice cut in, soft and dangerous. My daughter was frequently present during Mr. Wren's work. She has been of great inspiration to him. I asked whether she sat. Rosamund's lips parted. No answer came. Penrith stepped in smoothly. Artistic inspiration is rarely so literal. Miss Calder's delicacy may well have informed the tone. Lucian looked from Rosamund's flawless gloves to the painted seam at the window. Delicacy did not mend that thumb. Rosamund flushed as if he had accused her of something more shameful than new leather. Wren lowered his eyes. Lady Seraphina's smile remained, but the muscles around it hardened. Your Grace, may I suggest that this interest risks giving consequence to a trivial matter? No. The simplicity of the answer stopped her. Lucian placed the catalogue card on the edge of the frame. Mr. Wren, you will attend Harrowmere House tomorrow at 11 o'clock. Bring your preliminary sketches, drafts, and any catalogue notes connected to this work. Wren bowed. Yes, Your Grace. Penrith's glass lowered. Those materials belong to the patron. Then the patron may attend. Lady Seraphina's eyes cooled. You speak as if fraud has occurred. I speak as if truth has been made inconvenient. And if the sitter prefers discretion? Lucian looked again at the painted face. The woman did not look discreet. She looked silenced. There was a difference, and the difference had begun to matter far more than he liked. Then she may tell me so herself. A whisper bloomed, then died when he turned. Until then, the painting remains here. Penrith laughed once. You cannot command another person's exhibition. I can make it unwise to tamper with evidence after I have asked a question. That was not entirely polite. It was effective. A footman near the door straightened. Two matrons exchanged glances. Lady Seraphina lowered her fan by half an inch, and in that small movement Lucian saw it clearly. Fear, not of scandal in general, of this scandal taking the wrong shape. His interest had disturbed a plan already in motion. Your Grace, she said, her tone newly gentle, the woman, whoever she may be, is likely of no standing. You know how quickly attention can harm those unprepared for it. A kindness may be to leave her obscure. The words were reasonable. That made them more dangerous. Lucian had heard such language from trustees, husbands, fathers, and guardians. Kindness as concealment, protection as ownership, silence as a favor granted by the powerful to the powerless. The woman in the portrait had already been obscured. The room had gathered to admire the result. No one painted with such truth is inconsequential, he said. Find her. Penrith blinked. Your Grace? Lucian faced the portrait once more. Something in him had shifted, and he did not yet know whether it was anger, recognition, or the beginning of a mistake. He only knew the word unnamed had become intolerable. Bring her to Harrowmere Palace. The room went still. Not quiet. Still. There was a difference. Quiet belonged to manners. Stillness belonged to shock. Lady Seraphina's fan froze. Rosamond's face lost its practiced softness. Penrith's expression flickered with alarm before he recovered a smile. A dramatic command over a canvas. No, Lucian said. A necessary one over a lie. He left soon after because remaining would only give society more chances to invent the wrong story in his presence. Outside, cold air met him beneath the lamps. His carriage waited by the curb, black and polished, the Harrowmere crest visible in the wavering light. He paused before entering. The gallery windows glowed behind him. Inside, they would already be speaking. By supper, half of Mayfair would say he had been enchanted by a painted beauty. By breakfast, someone would say he had discovered a mistress, a fraud, or a future bride. London never left emptiness alone when it could fill it with poison. Harrowmere House, Your Grace, the footman asked. First to Teague, Lucian said. Tell him I want the artist's contract, the printer's proofs, and every hand that touched that catalogue card. Yes, Your Grace. Lucian stepped into the carriage, but the covered darkness inside gave him no relief. He saw the painted hand again. The seam at the thumb, the still face, the eyes refusing pity. Across London at Calder House, Honoria Vale stood in the servants' passage with a tray of folded linen when Lady Seraphina returned from the exhibition. Rosamond followed her, pale and restless. Lord Giles Penrith entered last and shut the door with unusual care. Honoria lowered her eyes, but not before she saw the expression on Lady Seraphina's face. The evening had not gone as planned. Miss Vale, Lady Seraphina said. You will remain upstairs tomorrow. Honoria's hands tightened on the linen. Lady, you are unwell. If anyone asks, you are not receiving visitors, not answering questions, and not available for household duties beyond Miss Calder's private needs. Rosamond looked at Honoria, then away. Lord Giles smiled without humour. His Grace has developed an appetite for accuracy. How tiresome for us all. Honoria felt the air leave her slowly. His Grace asked about the portrait. Lady Seraphina stepped closer. His Grace asked about the sitter. He does not know she is you. He need never know if you remember who provides your roof, meals, and reference. The tray grew heavy in Honoria's arms. And if he asks me directly? Lady Seraphina's eyes sharpened. He will not reach you directly. But if he does? For a moment no one spoke. Then Lord Giles gave a soft laugh. How brave poverty becomes when a duke has noticed its glove. Honoria said nothing. Lady Seraphina's voice dropped. Do not mistake attention for rescue. Power does not love what it finds. It uses it. Later, alone in her small room, Honoria took the repaired glove from her drawer and held it in her lap until the candle burned low. Somewhere beyond Calder House, a duke had looked at the portrait and demanded the truth. Inside Calder House, the truth had just been ordered to stay upstairs. Morning arrived at Calder House with the sound of paper being hidden. Honoria Vale heard it before she saw it. The quick scrape of a drawer opened too sharply, the rustle of foolscap, the small decisive click of Lady Seraphina Calder turning a key. The house had not yet received callers. Rosamond had not yet come down. Even the maids moved softly, as if the walls had been warned to listen. Honoria stood in the breakfast-room doorway, with the household correspondence in her hand, and the repaired glove folded inside her pocket, because she had slept with it beneath her pillow and woken ashamed of the comfort. "Do not hover," Lady Seraphina said. She sat at the writing desk by the window, dressed in dark blue silk, her hair arranged with severity. "It makes poverty look expectant." Honoria entered and placed the letters on the tray. "Forgive me, my lady. That depends on whether you require forgiving again before noon." Lord Giles Penrith stood beside the desk, already immaculate, already smiling, as though the morning had been invented for his amusement. A page lay before him. Honoria saw only a glimpse before Lady Seraphina covered it with her hand. But the words struck faster than thought. "Sitter, Miss Honoria Vale." Then the page vanished beneath another sheet. Honoria's body remained still. Her heart did not. "His Grace wastes no time," Lord Giles said. "A note came to Harrowmere's solicitor before breakfast, I am told. By 11, half the printers in London may discover they had memories." Lady Seraphina slid the visible page into the drawer. "Then we shall improve the memories that matter." The key turned. Click. Honoria looked at the locked drawer and felt the sound lodge inside her. Yesterday, her name had been crossed out. Today, it had been locked away. Lady Seraphina held up another letter. "Read this." Honoria took it. The crest at the top of the paper was unmistakable. Severe and black against cream. Harrowmere. Her fingers did not tremble, though the page seemed heavier than any paper had the right to be. "Lady Calder," she read. "His Grace the Duke of Harrowmere requests clarification regarding the sitter of the painting exhibited under the title The Woman at the Window. His Grace further requests that Mr. Elias Wren's preliminary sketches, printer's proofs, and catalogue notes be made available at Harrowmere House this morning at 11 o'clock. His Grace trusts that a matter concerning a lady's identity will be treated with proper seriousness." Rosamond entered just as the last words left Honoria's mouth. She wore a morning gown of pale lavender and the uneasy expression of someone who had hoped the night would make truth less demanding. "Proper seriousness," Lord Giles repeated. "How very ducal. One almost hears the door closing." Lady Seraphina took the letter back. "The Duke may request whatever he pleases. He is accustomed to receiving compliance, which is precisely why he must be given something that resembles it." Rosamond looked from her mother to Honoria. "What does that mean?" "It means you will stop looking frightened." "I'm not frightened." "Then arrange your face more convincingly." Lord Giles selected a fresh proof from his leather case and placed it on the desk. "This is the version that matters." Honoria's gaze moved before she could prevent it. The line where her name had been was gone. In its place, written in an elegant hand, were the words, "Inspired by a private study from Calder House." Such a soft phrase. It did not lie loudly. It simply opened a door and invited society to enter the wrong room. "No direct falsehood," Lord Giles said. "No vulgar claim, only suggestion." "Suggestion is far harder to punish." Rosamond sat slowly. "But if he asks whether I sat for it, you will say you were present during Mr. Wren's work," Lady Seraphina replied. "Which is true. Present is not the same as painted. Truth, my dear, is often a matter of which window one stands beside." Honoria said nothing. Lady Seraphina looked at her. "You have an opinion, Miss Vale." "I can hear it not being spoken. I would not presume. Wise, if not entirely credible." Lord Giles leaned against the desk. "Miss Vale has become attached to precision. A touching habit in a woman whose future depends upon flexibility." Honoria met his gaze. "My future may depend upon many unpleasant things, my lord. I hope dishonesty is not one of them." Rosamond drew in a breath. Lady Seraphina rose. The movement was unhurried, which made it worse. She crossed the room until she stood close enough for Honoria to smell the violets in her perfume. You are here because I allowed you to be here. Your father left you gentility without income, education without protection, and pride without market value. I gave you a roof, meals, and a reference that may yet keep you from becoming a burden no respectable house will accept. Honoria's face felt cold. I know what I owe, my lady. No, you know what you resent. Owing requires humility. If His Grace asks me directly whether Miss Calder sat for the portrait, I cannot say she did. Lady Seraphina's eyes narrowed. Cannot? Honoria heard the drawer key settle against Lady Seraphina's chatelaine. She thought of the locked proof, of the crossed-out name, of the painted woman whose hand had been turned toward the light, without permission to be called real. Will not, she said. The breakfast room changed. Rosamond turned pale. Lord Giles's amusement vanished, then returned in a thinner shape. Lady Seraphina looked almost satisfied, as if Honoria had finally become open enough to be corrected properly. Poor gentlewomen survive by obedience, she said. Not by speeches, not by imagined principle, not by confusing a duke's curiosity with deliverance. I do not expect deliverance. Good. Expectations are expensive. Lord Giles moved to the window and drew the curtain wider. Enough solemnity. Miss Calder must practice. Rosamond stared at him. Practice what? Being believed. Within the hour, the blue drawing room had been rearranged. The chair near the window was removed. A small easel stood to the side, not holding the portrait itself, but a rough copy of its arrangement. Rosamond was placed in the same fall of light Honoria had occupied days before. Though her gown was brighter, her gloves new, and her discomfort more visible than she wished. Lady Seraphina corrected the angle of her chin. Lord Giles adjusted the position of her hand. Not too eager, he said. The figure in the picture has the air of someone who has suffered quietly. Try to look as if you have endured something deeper than a dull sermon. Rosamond blushed. This is absurd. Many successful things are. Honoria stood near the sideboard with a tray of folded napkins, forced to watch the imitation of her own erasure. Rosamond turned her right hand toward the window. The glove was flawless. Lady Seraphina frowned. The hand is too smooth, Lord Giles smiled. A detail can be supplied. He took a pencil and lightly darkened the seam of Rosamond's glove, where Honoria's had been mended. The sight sent a sharper pain through Honoria than she expected. Poverty copied as ornament. Need borrowed by someone who would never fear it. Rosamond saw Honoria's face and looked away. Mama, I don't like this. You are not required to like it. You are required to behave intelligently. What if he sees? Then he will see what we present. Honoria stepped forward before she had decided to move. His Grace noticed the glove because it was true. Lady Seraphina turned. Did I ask you to contribute? No, my lady. Then do not. Lord Giles's voice softened. Let her speak. It is useful to know which way the conscience bends before one purchases its silence. Honoria looked at him, then at Rosamond. A false detail draws the eye more than an omitted one. For 1 second, Rosamond's expression changed. Shame entered it, raw and young. Then Lady Seraphina crossed the room and removed the pencil from Lord Giles's hand. Miss Vale, you will take these napkins downstairs. Yes, my lady. Honoria lifted the tray. As she passed the writing desk near the door, she saw the key still hanging from Lady Seraphina's chatelaine. Behind that locked drawer lay the proof of her name, trapped in a house that had learned how to use silence as furniture. At noon, a footman entered with a card on a silver tray. Lady Seraphina glanced at it and grew very still. Read it, she said, handing it to Honoria. The card felt small and dangerous between her fingers. The Duke of Harrowmere requests the honor of calling at Calder House tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Rosamond gripped the window curtain. Lord Giles let out a short laugh. Persistent, Lady Seraphina recovered first. Then we shall receive him. Mamma, Rosamond whispered. What if he asks again? He will ask what he has been led to ask. He will see what he has been led to see. Her eyes shifted to Honoria. And Miss Vale will be indisposed if necessary. Honoria lowered the card, but did not give it back at once. The Duke would enter Calder House. He would walk into the blue drawing room where her name had been crossed out, locked away, and replaced by suggestion. Perhaps he would believe them. Perhaps he would not. Perhaps power, as Lady Seraphina said, only used what it found. Yet the question had already changed the house. For the first time in 2 years, the people who erased Honoria were afraid of being seen doing it. Lady Seraphina held out her hand for the card. Honoria gave it to her. "Miss Vale," she said. "Remember your position." Honoria curtsied. Her voice remained quiet. "I do, my lady." But when she returned upstairs, she took out the repaired glove and mended the seam again, though it did not need mending. Stitch by stitch, she made it stronger. Tomorrow, if the Duke of Harrowmere asked her directly, she would not lie. At 2 o'clock the next afternoon, Calder House prepared to receive the Duke of Harrowmere, as if truth itself could be polished into obedience. The blue drawing room had been altered with such care that Honoria Vale almost pitied the furniture. The chair near the window was placed where she had stood during Mr. Wren's first sketch. A pale shawl had been draped across it, though no one in the house had ever allowed Honoria the comfort of such softness. Rosamond Calder wore a gown of muted grey blue, chosen to echo the portrait without admitting imitation, and her right glove bore a faint line where Lord Giles had brushed pencil against the leather to mimic the repaired seam. She kept rubbing at it with her thumb until Lady Seraphina caught her wrist. "Do not fidget," her mother said. "Nervousness is useful only when it flatters." Rosamond pulled her hand away. "It feels ridiculous. It feels necessary." Honoria stood just beyond the open door with a tray of clean teacups, close enough to hear and far enough to be dismissed. Lady Seraphina had ordered her not to enter once His Grace arrived. Her role was to remain useful in the passages, invisible to the parlour, and indisposed if named. Lord Giles Penrith stood by the mantel, admiring the arrangement as if he had hung a snare and found it tasteful. "The Duke is observant," he said, "but observation can be led. Men of power often believe they discover what has been placed before them." Lady Seraphina looked at Rosamond. "Remember that." The front door sounded below, not loudly. Calder House was too well trained for loudness, yet the knock seemed to travel through every wall. Honoria's hand tightened on the tray. Lady Seraphina's face smoothed into welcome. Rosamond lifted her chin. Lord Giles smiled. A footman announced, "His Grace the Duke of Harrowmere." Lucian Mowbray entered without haste, bringing with him no warmth, no flattery, and no visible desire to be pleased. Honoria saw only part of him from the passage: dark coat, broad shoulders, gloved hand, the severe line of a man accustomed to rooms correcting themselves around him. He bowed to Lady Seraphina with exact courtesy. "Lady Calder, Your Grace, we are honoured." Honour is often claimed by the hostess before the guest has formed an opinion. Lord Giles laughed. Rosamond curtsied too deeply, then recovered. Lucian's gaze moved to her glove, then to the window, then to the empty chair arranged in borrowed melancholy. "Miss Calder," he said, "how fortunate that your household light falls so obediently." Rosamond blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "Nothing." He looked to Lady Seraphina. "I was told Mr. Wren's sketches would be available." "They are being gathered." Lady Seraphina's smile did not weaken. "Artists misplace things. Genius is rarely tidy." Honoria turned to obey the signal from the housekeeper and carry the tray toward the back corridor. At that exact moment, Agnes Pike, the youngest maid, came through the service door with a stack of papers from the library and a pitcher of water balanced against her hip. She saw Honoria, saw the footman behind her, panicked and stumbled. The pitcher tilted. Water rushed across the tray, splashed the floor, and spread toward the papers like a clear, fast hand. "Oh, Miss Vale," Agnes whispered, horrified. "I'm ruined." Honoria set down the teacups and dropped to her knees. "No, you are not. Lift the top pages." Quickly, she gathered the papers before the water reached the ink. Some were blank. Some bore Mr. Wren's sketches, a study of a window, a hand turned toward light, the edge of a face. Honoria's own face, barely formed and unmistakable. Agnes began to cry under her breath. "Lady Calder will dismiss me." She said if anything went wrong today, She'd know who did it. Then nothing went wrong. Honoria took off her repaired glove and used the dry inner lining to blot water from the lowest sheet. The act was foolish. The glove was all she had. But the sketch had her name written faintly in Wren's hand at the corner, and if the ink ran, another small truth would vanish before anyone saw it. "Miss Vale," a voice said behind her. Honoria froze. The corridor grew still. She turned from her knees and found the Duke of Harrowmere standing a few feet away. He must have left the drawing room without being noticed, or more likely, without asking permission to be noticed. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes had gone to the glove in her hand. Not the borrowed pencil line on Rosamund's glove. The real seam. The worn leather. The place where poverty had been repaired, not decorated. Agnes scrambled to curtsy and almost slipped. Lucian did not move toward the papers. "Do you wish assistance?" he asked. Honoria had expected command. She had not expected a question. "The papers must be kept dry, Your Grace. Then I will not touch them unless you allow it." That simple restraint unsettled her more than arrogance would have. She gathered the sketches carefully. "Agnes, take the tray away. Say the cups were changed because one was chipped. But it wasn't. It is now." Honoria cracked one saucer against the edge of the tray, with enough force to mark it, not enough to shatter it. Agnes stared. Lucian's mouth moved almost imperceptibly. Not a smile, but something near respect. The maid fled with the tray. Honoria rose with the rescued papers in her arms. Her ungloved hand was damp. Her repaired glove hung over the top sketch, and she resisted the urge to hide it. Lucian looked at her face for the first time fully. She felt the force of that attention. Not greedy, not casual. Worse, because it was precise. "You are Miss Vale," he said. It was not a question. She curtsied. "Yes, Your Grace." Honoria Vale? The name in his voice changed the corridor. It sounded less like a household label and more like evidence restored. "Yes, you were not indisposed after all." "Not sufficiently, it seems." His eyes sharpened with amusement and anger mixed so tightly she could not separate them. "Lady Calder told me you were unavailable." Lady Calder often improves facts before presenting them. The words escaped too quickly. She lowered her gaze. "Forgive me, Your Grace." That was improper. It was clear. Clarity is not always permitted in this house. He glanced toward the drawing room, where Lady Seraphina's voice had grown brighter, likely discovering his absence. "Were you the sitter?" There it was, direct. Clean, the question she had promised herself she would not meet with a lie. Honoria looked down at the sketches in her arms. One bore the outline of her own guarded hand. Another showed the window where she had been placed because an artist saw restraint and a patron saw use. "I stood by the window for Mr. Wren," she said. The sitting was proper. The door was open. There were ladies present. That is not an answer to whether you were the woman painted. It is the safest answer I can give while standing under Lady Calder's roof. Lucian's face changed. The change was small, but she saw it. He understood shelter as leverage. "And if you were not under her roof," I would still answer carefully. "Because you fear me?" Honoria met his eyes. Because powerful men sometimes call curiosity protection before they know what they mean to protect. The corridor held the words. No maid moved. No clock seemed to tick. Lucian looked at the glove still lying across the sketch. "I gave a command last night." "Yes, Your Grace. You heard of it. Half the house heard of it before the candles were out. And what did you think?" She could have chosen flattery. She could have chosen gratitude. Both would have been useful. Neither would have been true. Women are not fetched like parcels, Your Grace. Lucian stood very still. For the first time since entering Calder House, he looked not offended but corrected. "No," he said, "they are not." Honoria had not expected agreement. It left her unguarded for one dangerous second. She looked away first. "Lady Calder will be waiting." "Yes, she has arranged a great deal for me to see." "Then you should see it." "I believe I already have." Footsteps approached. The footman from the drawing room appeared, flustered. "Miss Vale, her ladyship requires you to remain below stairs." Lucian turned his head. "Miss Vale is presently assisting me." The footman swallowed. "Yes, Your Grace." And when you address her, you will use her name. The correction was quiet. It still struck the passage like a bell. Yes, Your Grace, Miss Vale. Honoria's throat tightened, but she did not thank him. Gratitude would make the moment smaller, and it had not been small. Lucian looked back at the papers. May I take one? Which one? He waited while she sorted through them. That waiting mattered. She chose the study of the window without her face, only the gloved hand and the light. This one. He accepted it by the edge. His fingers did not brush hers. You choose what is safest to reveal. I choose what is mine to risk. This time he did smile, faintly and without triumph. A necessary distinction. Lady Seraphina appeared at the end of the corridor, her expression fixed in bright alarm. Your Grace, we feared you had lost your way. On the contrary, Lucian said. I found the passage most informative. Her eyes went to Honoria, then to the papers, then to the glove. Miss Vale, why are you detaining His Grace? She is not, Lucian said. I detained myself. Lord Giles came into view behind her. His smile strained. Rosamond hovered in the doorway, one hand pressed over the false seam on her glove. Honoria curtsied and stepped back, still holding the remaining sketches. Lady Seraphina extended a hand. Those papers belong in the drawing room. Honoria gave them to her because she had no legal right to keep them. Yet one truth had already moved from paper into a witness. Lucian held the chosen sketch. Lady Seraphina noticed too late. Your Grace, that is merely a rough study. Yes, he said. Rough things are often less practiced in deceit. He walked back toward the drawing room. Honoria followed at a proper distance, because Lady Seraphina's look commanded it, but for the first time, the distance did not feel like disappearance. The guests, few but strategically chosen, turned as the Duke re-entered. Rosamond stood by the window exactly where she had been placed, pale and lovely and wrong. Lucian did not look at her first. He set the sketch on the small table beneath Mr. Wren's copied arrangement. Then he faced Lady Seraphina. Now, he said, perhaps we may discuss why the sitter's name was removed. The room inhaled. Honoria stood near the door, gloveless on one hand and visible to everyone. Lady Seraphina's plans had not collapsed, not yet. But they had cracked, and through that crack, for one impossible moment, Honoria's name had entered the room before anyone could shut it out. Lady Seraphina Calder did not answer the Duke's question in the blue drawing room. She survived it. That was one of her gifts. Lesser women lied too quickly, defended too loudly, or showed fear in the eyes. Lady Seraphina did none of these. She turned the moment into a mistake of social temperature, smiled with faint injury, and said that artists often misunderstood household studies, because artists were paid to exaggerate feeling. Lord Giles Penrith added that the catalogue had been simplified for elegance. Rosamond stood by the window with the false seam on her glove and looked as if elegance had become a rope around her throat. Lucian Mowbray listened, asked for copies of the printer's proof, and left Calder House with the rescued sketch folded inside his coat. He did not accuse. That made Lady Seraphina more afraid than accusation would have done. By the next evening, she had answered fear with dinner. Calder House glowed from pavement to cornice, every lamp lit, every servant instructed, every arrangement designed to make lies appear native to the room. The invitation list was small enough to seem intimate and chosen enough to travel. Lady Bexham came because she knew all the doors through which gossip preferred to enter. Sir Anselm Ford and his wife came because his purchases in art were never separate from his hunger for rank. Lord Giles came because he had helped set the snare. Lucian came because refusing would have allowed others to describe the evening for him. Honoria came because Lady Seraphina needed someone to pour, carry, fetch, and be blamed if the invisible machinery failed. She wore her grey gown again, not by choice, and the repaired glove mended so neatly that only a careful eye would see the doubled seam. Lady Seraphina noticed it at once. "Remove that glove," she said, in the small morning room before the guests arrived. Honoria looked down at her hand. "My lady, you heard me." Rosamond turned from the looking-glass. Her own glove had been marked more delicately this time, a faint line along the thumb, enough to echo the portrait without confessing imitation. Mamma. Surely that is unnecessary. I decide what is necessary. Honoria drew off the glove slowly. Without it, her hand looked too bare, the skin faintly rough from mending, ink, and household work. Lady Seraphina held out her hand. Honoria placed the glove in it. The loss was small. It felt intimate. Lady Seraphina folded the glove once and set it inside a drawer. You will serve without drawing attention to yourself. Yes, my lady. And if His Grace speaks to you, I will answer respectfully. You will answer briefly. Honoria met her gaze. Those are not always the same thing. Lady Seraphina's smile vanished for less than a second. Do not test the difference tonight. Dinner began with civility sharpened to a point. Rosamond sat where the candlelight softened her face. Lord Giles praised the portrait before the soup was cleared, calling it a study in noble restraint, and looking at Rosamond as if he had hung the words around her neck. Lady Bexham smiled. One hears the inspiration was closer to home than first admitted. Lady Seraphina lowered her eyes with perfect modesty. One hears many things when a painting attracts attention. Lucian looked at Rosamond's marked glove. Indeed. Rosamond's fingers curled beneath the table. Honoria stood behind Lady Seraphina's chair with the wine, silent, ungloved on one hand. She could feel Lucian's awareness before he turned. It did not rest on her like gossip. It arrived with focus and then withdrew, as if he knew attention could endanger what it wished to understand. That restraint disturbed her more than open defense would have done. Lord Giles lifted his glass. Miss Calder, you must forgive us if we press. A sitter rarely improves a painting by denying her influence. Rosamond swallowed. I do not deny that Mr. Wren worked often in this house. Near the window, Lucian asked. Sometimes. With your right hand turned toward the light, Rosamond looked to her mother. Lady Seraphina answered smoothly. Artists ask for many postures. A young lady cannot be expected to catalogue every angle of her own grace. No, Lucian said, but she might remember discomfort. Rosamond's eyes flickered. Discomfort? The hand in the painting is not posed for vanity. It is reluctant. The table grew quiet. Lord Giles smiled. Your Grace reads much into leather. Less than others are asking me to read into silence. Honoria stepped forward to pour for Lady Bexham. Her bare hand passed near the candle. Lucian saw it. So did Lord Giles. His gaze sharpened with satisfaction, as if he had found an unguarded door. Miss Vale, he said lightly. You were present during Mr. Wren's work, were you not? Lady Seraphina did not turn, but Honoria saw her shoulders still. I was in and out of the room, my lord. Useful phrase. In and out. Near and not near. One begins to suspect the entire household sat for the picture in fragments. Sir Anselm chuckled. Then, perhaps the Duke must marry the house. No one laughed freely. Lucian's voice was calm. The house would object to being commanded. Honoria nearly looked at him. She did not. Lord Giles leaned back. Did Mr. Wren ever ask you to stand near the window, Miss Vale? The room tightened. Rosamond's face went white. If Honoria said yes plainly, Rosamond would be exposed before everyone. And though Rosamond had borrowed the lie, she had not invented it. If Honoria said no, her own name would vanish again by consent. Mr. Wren asked several of us to move as he arranged the composition, Honoria said. He was particular about light. Lord Giles's smile widened. How generous. Accuracy is often mistaken for generosity by people who prefer confusion. Lady Bexham's fan paused mid-air. Lady Seraphina turned her head a fraction. Lucian set down his glass with care. Well, said Miss Vale, it was not praise enough to expose her. It was enough to steady her. Rosamond looked at Honoria then, openly, with something like shame. The next course arrived, and with it a brittle attempt at conversation. Music, the opera, the newest colour from Paris. The tiresome cost of keeping country houses heated. Yet the portrait remained at the table like an unseen guest. Lady Seraphina tried to guide Lucian toward Rosamond by speaking of Harrowmere Palace, its long galleries, its chapel, its duty to continuation. Lucian answered with cool precision and gave no doorway to hope. Lord Giles watched him watch Honoria. That was when Honoria understood the danger had changed. The lie was no longer enough. If Lucian continued to look past Rosamond, They would not merely hide Honoria. They would make her unsafe to defend. After dinner, while the ladies withdrew and the men delayed over wine, Honoria carried a small tray toward the side passage and found Lord Giles's glove on the floor near the study door. She bent to pick it up, then stopped. The door was ajar. Lady Seraphina's voice came from inside, low but clear. "He suspects too much." "Suspicion is not proof," Lord Giles replied. "The proof is in your drawer." "And Wren?" "Poor men become obedient when future commissions depend upon memory. The Duke has the hand sketch. A hand is not a woman. If pressed, we suggest the companion encouraged attention from the artist. Loneliness, ambition, perhaps an improper wish to be admired. Nothing explicit. A hint will do. Society dislikes defending women once they become inconvenient." Honoria's breath went still. Paper rustled inside the study. A drawer closed. When the voices moved closer, she stepped behind the angle of the passage wall, tray held steady through discipline rather than calm. Lord Giles emerged first. He held a folded note. Lady Seraphina followed, her expression already restored for company. They did not see Honoria. The note slipped from Lord Giles's hand as he adjusted his cuff and slid beneath the edge of the runner. He walked on. Lady Seraphina followed. Honoria waited until their footsteps faded, then set down the tray and lifted the paper. The writing was unmistakable, slanted, elegant, cruel. If Harrowmere presses further, suggest the companion sought attention from the painter and forced the likeness. A hint of impropriety will turn sympathy away from her. No man defends a woman once society makes her inconvenient. Honoria folded the note once. Her hand felt cold without the glove. Behind her, someone whispered, "Miss Vale." Rosamond stood in the passage, eyes fixed on the paper. She had heard enough, perhaps not all, but enough to know the shape of it. "Is it true," she asked, "that they would say that of you?" Honoria placed the note in the pocket, hidden beneath her apron. "It is written," Rosamond's mouth trembled. "I didn't know Lord Giles meant that." "What did you think he meant?" "I thought he meant to make Mamma's story convincing. I didn't think he would make you shameful." The innocence of that distinction almost hurt more than malice. Honoria looked at the girl who had stood in her borrowed light, and now appeared frightened by the shadow it cast. "Miss Calder, when someone builds a lie around a powerless woman, shame is usually the mortar." Rosamond covered the false seam on her glove. "You could have exposed me at dinner." "Yes. Why didn't you?" "Because you were being used too." Rosamond's eyes filled. "That doesn't make me innocent." "No." Honoria's answer was quiet. "It means you still have time not to become them." Footsteps sounded from the dining room. Lucian's voice, low and controlled, reached the passage before he did. Honoria stepped back into her proper place. But the note in her pocket seemed to burn through the cloth. Lord Giles appeared beside the Duke with his social smile restored. "A charming evening, Your Grace. I hope Miss Calder's delicacy has softened your suspicions." Lucian looked past him, just once, to Honoria. "No," he said. "It has clarified them." Lord Giles's smile did not move, but his eyes hardened. When Lucian departed, Lady Seraphina waited until the front door closed before turning toward the stairs. "Miss Vale," she said, "tomorrow you will not leave this house." Honoria curtsied. In her pocket lay the first proof that the lie had become an attack. In Rosamond's face lay the first crack in Lady Seraphina's design. And in the silence Lucian left behind, Honoria understood that being noticed had not saved her. It had made the next blow necessary. By the following Thursday, Lady Seraphina Calder had turned exposure into entertainment and called it a private viewing. The portrait returned to Calder House under a linen cover before luncheon, carried through the front hall by 2 footmen who had been warned not to look at it, and therefore looked at nothing else. By evening, the blue drawing room had been arranged, as if innocence required staging. Lamps burned low enough to flatter faces, and high enough to catch the silver thread on Lady Seraphina's gown. The portrait stood near the window where Honoria Vale had once been told she was catching too much light. A small cluster of guests gathered around it, all chosen for their ability to carry a story without leaving fingerprints. Lady Bexham was there with her fan. Sir Anselm Ford stood near Lord Giles Penrith, eager to learn which opinion would cost least. Two younger ladies whispered by the pianoforte. Rosamund Calder stood in pale grey, a faint false seam drawn again upon her glove. But her face had the drained look of someone made to wear another woman's wound. Honoria had been ordered to remain upstairs. She did not. Lady Seraphina had kept the repaired glove in her drawer. But Agnes Pike stepped into Honoria's room at dusk, with trembling hands, and the glove folded inside a clean napkin. "I shouldn't have taken it, Miss Vale," the maid whispered. "But I heard them laughing about it below." Lord Penrith said a true relic always improves a scandal. Honoria closed her fingers around the worn leather. "You have done nothing wrong. Her ladyship will know. Then say I found it myself. She won't believe me." "No," Honoria said softly. "But tonight, belief is already in short supply." She dressed in her plain grey gown, put the repaired glove on her right hand, and placed Lord Giles's note in the hidden pocket beneath her skirt. Her sketchbook went under her arm, tied with a faded ribbon. When she reached the drawing-room threshold, no one announced her. That was fitting. She had entered many rooms that way. The difference was that this time she did not stop at the edge. Lord Giles saw her first. His smile widened, not with surprise, but with satisfaction. "Ah," he said, just loud enough. "The household study appears in person." Lady Seraphina turned. For 1 second, anger stripped her face of elegance. Then she recovered. "Miss Vale, you are unwell. You should not be downstairs." "I am quite steady, my lady." Lady Bexam's fan lifted. "So this is the companion?" Another guest murmured. "The glove is the same." Lord Giles moved nearer to the portrait as if presenting both canvas and woman for sale. One must sympathize. A young person without fortune may become confused when an artist grants attention. A pose becomes a secret. A sketch becomes ambition. A little admiration can be very dangerous to those unused to it. Honoria felt every eye settle on her hand, her gown, her station. The room did not shout. It did worse. It measured her for shame. Lady Seraphina gave a wounded sigh. "I had hoped to spare Miss Vale this embarrassment. She has been in my household under protection. One cannot always foresee how impressionable minds respond to artistic notice." Rosamund made a faint sound. Her mother's gaze silenced it. "Did Mr. Wren ask you to stand in secrecy, Miss Vale?" Lord Giles asked. "No, but you stood, at Lady Calder's instruction, in the drawing-room, with others present." "Others present," he repeated. "How proper, how convenient," a younger lady whispered. "Paid companions must be careful," someone else replied, "or ambitious." Honoria's fingers curled inside the glove. She had known cruelty could be polite, but she had not known it could be so crowded. Lady Seraphina stepped closer, her voice low enough to sound merciful. "Leave the room now, and I will consider this an unfortunate lapse." Honoria looked at the portrait. The painted woman stood by the window, with the same repaired glove turned toward the light. Her sorrow had been made beautiful, but beauty had not protected her name. "No, my lady." Lady Seraphina's eyes chilled. "You forget yourself." "No," Honoria said. "That is what I am trying not to do." The words had barely settled when the drawing-room door opened. Lucien Mowbray entered without announcement, or else the footman's voice had been swallowed by the room's guilt. Every guest turned. Lord Giles's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Lady Seraphina arranged delight across her face. "Your Grace, we did not expect you so early," plainly. Lucian's gaze moved from the portrait to Honoria, then to the circle around her. He did not ask what had happened. The room had left enough evidence in its posture. "Miss Vale," he said. Her name crossed the silence like a correction. Honoria curtsied. "Your Grace." Lord Giles recovered. "You arrive at an instructive moment. We were only discussing how easily art may be misunderstood when social distance is forgotten." Lucien looked at him. Then the discussion was worse than useless. Lady Bexam lowered her fan. "Your Grace, surely there is some impropriety to explain. Lady Calder has been most distressed. Lady Calder appears composed." His voice cooled further. "Miss Vale does not." The sentence shifted the room's attention, and for once Honoria was not being watched as an accusation. She was being seen as the person harmed by one. Lucian turned to the footman. "Remove the painting." Lady Seraphina stiffened. "Your Grace, this is my house." "Then you should have made it safer for the woman whose likeness you displayed in it." Lord Giles gave a brittle laugh. "You cannot confiscate a patron's property because a companion has wept without tears. I can remove a canvas from a room being used to injure its subject." "Subject?" Sir Anselm repeated. "So it is she?" Lady Seraphina's smile thinned. "Nothing has been proved." Honoria took the note from her pocket before fear could stop her. "Not everything has been proved, but something has been written." She held it out. Lucian did not take it from her hand until she inclined it toward him. The small pause mattered even now. He read the note once. His expression did not change. But the room seemed to feel the danger of his stillness. "Lord Penrith," he said, "your confidence in society's cowardice is well documented." Lord Giles's face drained, then colored. "Private notes may be misread. This one labors to prevent misunderstanding." Lady Seraphina moved quickly. "Miss Vale has been distressed. She does not know what she implies." "She knows exactly," Lucian said. He turned to Honoria then, and some guarded urgency broke through his control. "You cannot remain here tonight." The words struck her more deeply than the insults. Not because they were false, but because they were too near what she wanted someone else to decide. "My carriage is outside," he continued. "You will come to Harrowmere Palace until this matter is settled." The room inhaled. Lady Bexham's eyes brightened with the pleasure of a scandal changing shape. Rosamond looked at Honoria with horror. Lady Seraphina's mouth curved very slightly, as if the Duke had handed her a sharper weapon wrapped in rescue. Honoria felt the trap close. If she went with him, every rumour would have a carriage, a destination, and a crest. If she refused, she lost the strongest protection in the room. Lucian had offered shelter. He had also offered to remove her as he had ordered the portrait removed. Kindly, publicly, without asking what justice required. "No," she said. Lucian went still. "Miss Vale." "No, Your Grace." Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. "I will not be carried out of one room to make another room more comfortable." His face changed. She saw the moment he understood, and because he understood, pain passed through his eyes before he hid it. "I intended protection. I know. That made it harder. But I won't accept a kinder version of the same erasure." Lady Seraphina gave a soft, poisonous sigh. "Then where, pray, will you go?" Honoria looked at her. "Somewhere I can speak truth without purchasing shelter with silence." Lord Giles smiled faintly. "A noble sentence. Poor lodgings will be less impressed." Lucian turned on him. "If one whisper follows Miss Vale from this house, I will know where it began. If any servant here is punished for assisting her, I will know that as well. Do not test how much of London depends upon my indifference." No one mistook the quiet for mercy. Honoria felt Agnes somewhere in the passage, unseen and shaking. She hoped the girl heard. Lucian looked back at Honoria, and this time, he asked the question he should have asked first. "May I at least have a carriage called for you?" She could have refused out of pride. Pride was not the same as wisdom. "A hackney," she said. "Not yours, as you wish." The phrase, from him, sounded like an apology beginning too late. Honoria went upstairs with Agnes behind her, and packed in less than 10 minutes. There was little to take. A clean chemise, her mother's small prayer book, the sketchbook, 2 pencils. Lord Giles' note. The repaired glove stayed on her hand. She counted the coins in her purse, enough for the hackney if the driver did not argue over distance. When she descended, the hall was full of people pretending not to watch. Lady Seraphina stood by the stairs. "You are making yourself impossible, Miss Vale." Honoria paused on the last step. "No, my lady, I was made useful." "There is a difference." The front door opened. Cold air entered, clean after the crowded perfume of the drawing room. The footman looked uncertain until Lucian's gaze settled on him. Then he stood aside. Honoria walked through Calder House by the front door. No back passage. No servant's stare. No dismissal disguised as discretion. The hackney waited at the curb, its horse stamping in the damp street. She gave the driver her coins before he could ask who would pay. Lucian stood several feet away, hat in hand, not approaching. That restraint hurt and steadied her at once. "Miss Vale," he said. "Where shall he take you?" "Bloomsbury, Mrs. Beatrice Vane." "You trust her?" "Yes." "Then I will not follow." Honoria looked at him through the thin grey light. "Thank you." She entered the hackney before the words could become softer. As the carriage pulled away from Mayfair, Calder House remained bright behind her, full of witnesses, whispers, and a portrait no longer safely unnamed. Honoria held her sketchbook against her chest. She had lost roof, reference, and certainty in one evening. Yet for the first time since the canvas left the window, the story of her name was no longer entirely in someone else's hand. The hackney left Honoria Vale at the edge of Bloomsbury, with 6 minutes of rain on her bonnet, 3 coins in her purse, and no certainty that Mrs. Beatrice Vane would open the door. The house was narrow, respectable, and a little tired, standing in a row of other narrow, respectable, tired houses, whose windows looked out upon a square, more practical than fashionable. Honoria paid the driver before he could glance too long at her grey gown and the sketchbook clutched against her chest. The repaired glove was damp at the seams. Her shoes had taken water. She stood beneath the small portico and lifted the knocker with a hand that had not trembled while leaving Calder House, but trembled now that there was no audience to withstand. Mrs. Vane herself opened the door. She was a widow in her late 50s, once governess to half the daughters now ruling drawing rooms with poor judgment. And she possessed the kind of face that could make pity behave itself. Her cap was plain. Her eyes were sharp. She looked at Honoria's wet hem, the sketchbook, the glove, and the absence of luggage worth naming. "You did it then?" Honoria swallowed. "I left. Good. Come in before courage catches a chill." The words were brisk, but Mrs. Vane took the sketchbook first, as if she knew what Honoria could bear to lose least. In the small parlour, a fire burned low, and the tea tray held 1 cup, as if Mrs. Vane had been expecting trouble to arrive alone. Honoria removed her bonnet, sat when told, and tried not to look too grateful for the chair. Gratitude, like grief, could become uncontrollable if given warmth. Mrs. Vane poured tea and placed bread, cheese, and cold chicken beside it. "Eat before you explain." Women always attempt explanations on empty stomachs, then wonder why men call us unreasonable. Honoria obeyed, because pride was easier when one was not faint with hunger. Only after the first few bites did she lay out what she had carried from Calder House. Lord Giles's note. The small studies from Mr. Wren that she had been permitted to keep because no one had thought them dangerous. A copy of the catalogue wording she had made from memory. Her sketchbook tied with its faded ribbon. The repaired glove. Mrs. Vane listened without interruption, though her mouth became flatter with each paper. When Honoria showed her the note accusing her of seeking improper attention, Mrs. Vane read it twice. "Lord Penrith writes villainy like a man proud of his penmanship. It may not be enough." "Enough for what?" "To restore my name." Mrs. Vane looked up. "My dear, the world rarely restores what it has enjoyed taking. We must make restoration less costly than refusal." Honoria looked at the evidence on the table. The papers appeared thin and fragile in the firelight. She had imagined them stronger while fleeing. Now they looked like what they were, scraps held against rank, money, and a roomful of trained disbelief. "I had another study," she said suddenly. "Mr. Wren's first outline of the hand and window. He wrote my name in the corner." She untied the sketchbook, opened it, and turned the pages quickly. Window studies, notes on folds of cloth, a door from Calder House, a half-drawn hand. Then an empty slit where a page had been removed long ago or badly cut. Honoria stopped. "This was here." Mrs. Vane leaned forward. "When? Yesterday morning. I am certain. Could Lady Calder have taken it before you left? Perhaps. But the cut is too clean. I would have noticed." Honoria touched the edge where the missing page had been. The loss was small, but it felt like a warning laid in advance. If they have it, they may use it. "Then we prepare for that." Before Honoria could answer, the maid brought a sealed packet. No crest marked the outside, but the violet wax needed no name. Mrs. Vane broke it with a fruit knife and read the letter aloud because Honoria's hands had gone cold. "Miss Vale, in consideration of your recent distress and in gratitude for your past service. Lady Calder encloses a sum sufficient to ease your transition into a quieter household. It is trusted that good sense will prevent any further public confusion over an unfortunate artistic misunderstanding. No character reference can be provided if discretion is not maintained. Inside lay banknotes, not many by Lady Seraphina's measure, enough by Honoria's to alter the shape of the next several months' rent. Food, a pair of gloves without a mended thumb. Time to seek a position before gossip ruined the search. Time to breathe without counting coal by the scuttle. She stared at the money until the fire blurred. For one terrible moment she wanted it. Not because she believed Lady Seraphina, not because she was weak, because hunger had memory, because dependence was not a theory when one owned 3 coins. One grey gown and a name society had already begun to stain. "Say what it is," Mrs. Fane said quietly. Honoria did not look away from the banknotes. "It is money." "No." "It is shelter." "No." Honoria closed her eyes. The answer hurt more when spoken correctly. "It is the price of my silence, Mrs. Fane folded the letter and placed it beside Lord Giles's note. "Now decide whether she can afford you." Honoria laughed once, softly and without joy. "She cannot." She took the banknotes, returned them to the packet, and kept the letter. "The money goes back. The words remain. Excellent. Never discard a villain's signature when she is kind enough to provide one." By evening, the rain had stopped, but the square outside Mrs. Fane's window shone black beneath the lamps. Honoria sat at the small writing desk with clean paper before her, and the repaired glove beside the inkstand. She had written 3 beginnings and torn each one apart. The first sounded grateful, the second sounded wounded, the third sounded like a petition, and she refused to beg a duke to decide whether truth was convenient. Mrs. Fane sat near the fire, mending a handkerchief that did not require mending, giving Honoria privacy without absence. "Write as if he is neither your savior nor your enemy," she said. "What does that leave? A man with power who must be told what not to do with it." Honoria dipped the pen. "Your Grace," she wrote, "I left Calder House tonight not because I was rescued, but because I refused to remain useful to a falsehood. The portrait called The Woman at the Window was drawn from my likeness during a proper household sitting, with others present. My name was placed upon an early catalogue draft, and then removed. Lady Calder and Lord Penrith have since encouraged a different implication, one that exposes Miss Calder to false praise, and me to public shame. I do not ask for shelter. I do not ask that you close doors privately and call that justice. The injury was made public. If it is repaired only in private, the lie will survive in every room where I am not invited to contradict it." She paused. The next line mattered. "I ask that Mr. Wren be allowed to speak without fear for his livelihood, that any servant threatened for telling the truth be protected before she is used, and that Miss Calder not be made to carry all blame for a design she did not create. My name is Honoria Vale. I ask only that it be restored to the truth from which it was removed." She signed slowly, every letter deliberate, Honoria Vale. Then, because the page did not yet feel complete, she took a small blank card and sketched the repaired glove as it lay beside the inkstand. Not beautifully, honestly. Beneath it, she wrote her name again. Mrs. Fane crossed the room and read the letter. "This will bruise him. I did not write it to bruise him. That is why it will." A knock sounded below, and a boy from the corner print shop delivered the evening gossip sheet, folded and damp at the edge. Mrs. Fane frowned when she saw the title, but opened it anyway. Her silence warned Honoria before the words did. A new paragraph had appeared beneath the column of society trifles. The Duke of Harrowmere's sudden concern for a certain unnamed artistic subject has inspired much speculation. One hears the lady, formerly attached to a Mayfair household, possesses more sketches than Prudence. Whether she is muse, model, or purchased fancy remains to be seen. London must hope. His Grace's famous judgment has not been softened by a mended glove and a practiced sorrow. Honoria reached for the table and steadied herself. Purchased fancy. She had refused the money, and still they had found a way to call her bought. Mrs. Fane crushed the paper in her fist. Filth. No, Honoria said, though her voice was thin. A warning. Of what? That they have begun before he can answer. She sealed the letter to Lucian before courage could cool. The maid carried it to a trusted messenger, Mrs. Fane named from memory, and threatened with consequences so specific that he departed at once. Much later, when the house had quieted, Honoria sat alone by the dying fire with her sketchbook open to the cut page. Someone had taken one piece of her truth. Others would try to take more. She placed Lady Seraphina's hush letter beside Lord Giles's note, then laid the repaired glove across both, as if weighting them to the table. Tomorrow, Lucian Mowbray might choose convenience, reputation, or control. She could not decide that for him. She could decide what she had asked. Not pity, not secrecy, not shelter bought by silence. Justice. Lucian Mowbray received Honoria Vale's letter at Harrowmere House before breakfast, and by the time the coffee was poured, it had gone cold beside his untouched plate. He read the letter once as a duke, looking for names, claims, sequence, proof. He read it again as the man who had ordered a woman brought to his house, and had been told, with unbearable accuracy, that women were not fetched like parcels. The third time, he read only the line that would not leave him. The injury was made public. If it is repaired only in private, the lie will survive in every room where I am not invited to contradict it. Mr. Ambrose Teague stood at the far side of the breakfast room, with a sealed packet beneath one arm, and the patience of a man who knew silence could be more expensive than speech. Your Grace? Lucian folded the letter along its original creases. She asks for justice and gives me instructions on how not to confuse it with possession. An unusually sensible woman. You sound unsurprised. I have found that people without power often understand its dangers more clearly than those born with it. Lucian looked toward the window. London moved beyond the glass, brisk and indifferent, carrying gossip from breakfast tables to carriage steps and back again. Somewhere in Bloomsbury, Honoria Vale waited without roof, reference, or certainty, and she had still used her letter to protect the maid, the painter, and even Rosamund Calder. Tell me what you have. Teague opened the packet. Lord Penrith's accounts are strained. 2 unpaid printers. 1 dealer threatening withdrawal. Several commissions advanced against paintings not yet delivered. Lady Calder's household accounts show heavy dressmaker debts and unpaid carriage hire. Nothing illegal. Enough desperation to make deception attractive. The catalogue. The first printer's proof named Miss Honoria Vale. I have a copy from a clerk who prefers coin to loyalty. The second proof removed her name and added the phrase inspired by a private study from Calder House. The alteration was delivered by a man in Lord Penrith's livery. Lucian's hand closed on the edge of the table, and Wren, frightened, not cowardly. He says the sitting was proper and household supervised. He is afraid Lady Calder will ruin him with patrons before truth reaches anyone who matters. Then truth will have to matter faster. Teague's mouth tightened. There is one more point. The maid. She is being watched. Lucian rose. By whom? Lady Calder's people. If we approach her openly, she will lose wages, character, perhaps more. Then we do not approach openly. Before noon. Lucian's carriage stopped 2 streets from Calder House. He did not go to the front door. Dukes used front doors when they wished to be announced, and today he wished to hear what announcement would prevent. Teague, in plain dark clothes, walked beside him through a narrow lane behind the house, where tradesmen came and went. Ash cans stood against brick walls, and the grand manners of Mayfair thinned into work. Near the service entrance, Agnes Pike stood with a market basket on one arm and fear on her face. Lady Seraphina's voice reached them through the half-open back door, low and polished, which somehow made it worse. You are fortunate, Agnes. Girls who confuse themselves with witnesses often become girls without places. I didn't mean harm, my lady, Agnes whispered. I only gave Miss Vale her own glove. You gave a dismissed companion a relic around which she now builds scandal. If His Grace's man speaks to you again, you will see nothing, remember nothing, and say nothing. Do you understand? Yes, my lady. A character is a fragile thing. Yours is still in my hand. The door shut. Agnes stood motionless, basket trembling. Lucian felt old anger rise in him. Cold and clean. Not theatrical. Not loud. The kind that wanted accounts balanced because a frightened servant's future had been made into a leash. He stepped out only after Lady Seraphina's footsteps faded. Agnes startled so violently that Teague lifted a calming hand. "Miss Pike," Teague said gently, "no one here will ask you to speak against your interests." Agnes stared at Lucian and tried to curtsy, nearly dropping the basket. "Your Grace, I didn't do anything wicked." "I know." His voice was quieter than he expected. "And if Lady Calder dismisses you, you will have wages and a place found before nightfall. Not if you testify. Not if you please me, because threatening you was wrong before you ever became useful." Agnes's eyes filled. She said no one would believe me. Then she has been wrong at least twice today. Teague handed her a small card. "Come to this address only if you are dismissed or frightened. Ask for me. Do not carry notes through Calder House. Do not speak to Lord Penrith. Your safety comes before our evidence." Agnes took the card with both hands. "Miss Vale said you'd mean it." Lucian went still. "Did she? She said if you promised protection, you wouldn't forget a servant after remembering a lady." The words struck him more sharply than praise. Honoria had believed he could be better before he had proved it. That was a debt no ledger could hold. In the afternoon, he sent his card to Mrs. Beatrice Fane's house and waited on the step like any other caller. The maid looked at his crest, then at him, then vanished with gratifying suspicion. Mrs. Fane herself appeared moments later, assessing him from hat to boots. "Your Grace, Mrs. Fane, if you have come to command, the hall is an excellent place to abandon the habit. I have come to ask whether Miss Vale will receive me." The widow studied him. Better. She allowed him into a small parlour where the door remained open, and the chair nearest Honoria sat at a proper distance. Honoria rose when he entered. She wore the same grey gown, cleaned but still plain, and her repaired glove lay on the table beside 2 letters and a sketch of a hand. Her face was composed. Her eyes were not easy. "Your Grace, Miss Vale." He bowed. The formal distance between them should have protected him. It did not. He saw at once that she had slept little. He saw the faint shadows beneath her eyes, the set of her shoulders, and the shawl folded too far away to be useful, though the room had a chill in it. He wanted to move it around her shoulders. Instead, he took the shawl from the chair and placed it on the table within her reach, then stepped back without touching her or waiting for thanks. Her gaze dropped to the shawl, then returned to him, slightly altered. Mrs. Fane made no comment, which was the closest she seemed willing to come to approval. Lucian took the chair only after Honoria sat. "I owe you an apology. For Calder House, for offering shelter before asking what justice required. For thinking removal was the same as protection. For speaking once as if you were a matter to be brought where I wished you to stand." Honoria's fingers rested on the repaired glove, but did not pick it up. "I believed you meant kindness. That makes it no less mine to correct." "No," she said. "It does not." He accepted the answer because it was true. "Your letter named conditions. I have begun with Agnes Pike. Teague has secured a place and wages if Lady Calder dismisses her. Wren will be protected through Harrowmere patronage if he tells the truth. Rosamond Calder will not be made the scapegoat for her mother's design unless she chooses the lie again." Honoria's breath changed. A small loosening he might have missed had he not been watching for any sign she could rest. "Thank you. Do not thank me yet. I am still learning the difference between action and repair." Mrs. Fane's needle paused near the fire. A rare sentence from a duke. "I shall have it embroidered." Honoria almost smiled. The almostness of it affected him more than any open tenderness could have done. "There is another matter," she said. "Someone removed a page from my sketchbook before I left Calder House, or perhaps while I was still too frightened to notice. It bore my name in Mr. Wren's hand." Lucian looked at the cut edge she showed him. "Penrith or Lady Calder. Then they have proof and may turn it." "Yes. May I see the glove?" he asked. Her eyes lifted sharply. He knew at once why. It was not a relic, not a token for him to study like a collector. It had been made famous without her consent. He held out no hand, he waited. After a moment she gave it to him. The leather was worn soft, the seam repaired twice, the second row of stitches stronger than the first. He looked at it only long enough to understand, then placed it back near her hand. "The painting made me look," he said. "This tells me what I failed to see. And what is that? That dignity is often mistaken for ease by those who do not pay its cost." Honoria turned the glove palm down. "The cost is not always noble. Sometimes it is only exhausting." Yes. For one unguarded moment he wanted to say her name, not as evidence, not as correction, but because it had become the center of the room. "Honoria," he began, then stopped. "Forgive me." Her lashes lowered. The door remained open. Mrs. Fane remained in her chair. Nothing improper had happened, yet the air between them changed, not into intimacy, but into the possibility of trust. A knock sounded below. Mrs. Fane's maid entered with a cream envelope sealed in violet wax. Honoria did not need to open it to know the hand behind it. She broke the seal and read, "Lady Seraphina requests my presence tomorrow evening at a dinner in honor of Miss Calder's expected engagement prospects. She writes that His Grace's attendance is anticipated." Mrs. Fane's mouth hardened. Expected engagement prospects. That is a phrase built to carry a rumor. Lucian stood. She means to force the matter in public. Honoria folded the letter slowly. She looked tired, afraid, and steadier than fear deserved. "Then we shall not repair it in private." Lucian met her eyes and understood that the next room would decide more than a portrait. It would decide whether he had learned to stand beside a woman without turning his protection into another command. The drawer in Mrs. Fane's little guest room had been opened while Honoria Vale was downstairs, receiving the Duke of Harrowmere. She knew it before she touched the handle, because the corner stood out by the width of a fingernail, and Mrs. Fane's house, unlike Calder House, did not leave small disorders to explain themselves. Honoria stood in the doorway with the cream invitation still folded in her hand, feeling the room alter around her. The bed was neat. The basin stood clean. Her bonnet remained on the chair. Nothing appeared stolen to a careless eye. Then she saw the faded ribbon lying on the floor beside the writing table. It had been cut, not untied. For a moment she did not move. Fear, when it entered too quietly, could feel like thought. She crossed the room and pulled the drawer open. Her sketchbook was gone. The space where it had rested seemed indecently bright, as if absence had a color. Mrs. Fane came in behind her, took one look and shut the door with a calm more alarming than outrage. "Who entered this room?" Honoria asked. Her own voice sounded far away. "No one should have." Mrs. Fane rang the bell. When the maid arrived, she was pale before any accusation was made. "A boy came with a packet from Calder House," she said. "He said it was urgent and for Miss Vale's hand. I told him to wait below, but then Mrs. Bell from next door came in a flurry over a leaking pipe, and when I returned, the boy had gone." Mrs. Fane's eyes sharpened. "And the packet?" "There was none, ma'am. I thought he had lost patience." Honoria bent and picked up the cut ribbon. It was a foolish thing to mourn, a scrap faded by use. But it had held together the only book that had known her without correction. "They came here," she said. "Not to Calder House, not to a public room here." Mrs. Fane's face softened for half a second, then hardened again. "Then they are frightened." "No," Honoria said, looking at the empty drawer. "They are not frightened enough. By morning, the stolen sketchbook had reached London before she could." A gossip sheet arrived with the breakfast tray, damp from the street, and folded to the exact paragraph that wished to wound. A certain former companion, lately attached to a Mayfair household, is rumored to have filled private pages with studies of Harrowmere Palace, long before His Grace ever saw the now famous portrait. One wonders whether the woman at the window had been looking toward a ducal door all along. Honoria read the paragraph once. She did not need a second reading to understand the trap. In her sketchbook, there had indeed been a study of Harrowmere Palace, copied years earlier from an old county volume because she had loved architecture before she had known the Duke's face, voice, or command. Lord Giles would make imagination look like pursuit. He would turn a girl's private drawing into proof of ambition. Mrs. Fane took the paper from her. He has your book, yes. And he has selected what society will enjoy misunderstanding. Honoria looked at her repaired glove lying beside her plate. Then he will use it tonight. A quick knock came below. Too urgent for a caller, and too hesitant for a servant. Agnes Pike was brought into the parlour wrapped in a plain shawl, her eyes red, one hand clenched around a torn scrap of paper. She curtsied so low, she almost lost her balance. Miss Vale, I shouldn't have come, but I saw him. Lord Penrith had your book in the little study after supper. He was laughing with her ladyship. This fell when he tore something out. Honoria took the scrap. It was the corner of her own drawing, a slanted roofline from the imagined Harrowmere palace. Beneath it, in Lord Giles's elegant hand, someone had written, "Useful. Suggest longing for Harrowmere before meeting him." Immodesty of imagination, Mrs. Fane made a sound of disgust. Honoria folded the scrap slowly and laid it beside the gossip sheet. "Thank you, Agnes. Please don't tell them it was me. I will not." His Grace said I might have wages and a place if I lost mine. Did he mean it? Honoria thought of Lucian placing the shawl within reach and stepping back. She thought of him pausing before taking the glove. "Yes," she said, "he meant it." Agnes began to weep with relief. That relief hurt Honoria more than the gossip. A maid's future had become collateral in a lie about a painting. By noon, Lucian Mowbray stood in Mrs. Fane's parlour with Mr. Teague beside him, reading the stolen scrap with a stillness that made anger look almost gentle. Honoria watched him reach the phrase immodesty of imagination. His jaw tightened. Penrith is less subtle when frightened. He is not only frightened, Teague said. He is hurried. That makes him useful. Lucian looked at Honoria. I can end this before tonight. The words entered the room like a door opening too easily. Mrs. Fane lifted her gaze from the fire. Honoria remained still. How? I can withdraw Harrowmere patronage from every dealer connected to Penrith before dinner. Teague can place the proof before 3 men who influence half the invitations in London. Lady Calder's guests will discover headaches, sick horses, and moral uncertainty before the first course. It was tempting. That was what made it dangerous. Honoria imagined Calder House emptied of witnesses. Lord Giles's smile broken, Lady Seraphina's triumph cancelled before it began. She imagined not walking into another room prepared to wound her. She imagined quiet. Then she imagined the gossip surviving, because no one had been made to hear the truth aloud. No, she said. Lucian's eyes changed, though his face did not. Miss Vale, no, Your Grace. If you settle it privately, society will remember only that the matter was too delicate to discuss. Lady Calder will retreat behind injury. Lord Giles will choose another phrase. I will remain the companion whose shame was hidden by a duke. You would rather enter a room arranged for your humiliation? I would rather not, but I will. They will be cruel. They have been cruel already. His hand closed around the scrap. I do not like leaving you exposed. The answer rose before she could make it safer. Then don't leave me. Silence followed. Mrs. Fane looked down at her sewing. Teague studied the mantel as if the clock required legal attention. Honoria felt heat climb into her face. But she would not recall the words. Stand beside me, she said. Not before me so completely that no one hears my voice. Lucian looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression altered. Not softened exactly, but yielded. I have spent most of my life believing protection meant placing myself between danger and what I valued. And now I am learning that a wall can become another locked door. Mrs. Fane nodded once. Progress. Uncomfortable but visible. Teague cleared his throat. If Lord Penrith uses the sketchbook, we may use his use of it. The torn scrap connects him to possession. If he produces selected pages, he admits interference. If he suppresses it, we still have the theft. Honoria touched the cut ribbon in her pocket. Then let him walk into the room carrying his own trap. Lucian looked at her then, with something that felt more dangerous than admiration, because it asked nothing from her, and still saw everything. You are very brave. No, I am tired of being made small by people less brave than I am. The plan formed with almost brutal economy. Teague would secure Elias Wren before evening and keep Agnes away from Calder pressure. Lucian would attend the dinner, but would not allow Lady Seraphina to imply an engagement, a liaison, or a private arrangement. Honoria would enter as herself. Mrs. Fane would accompany her. No servant's door, no hidden stair, no borrowed grandeur. When the men left to make arrangements, Mrs. Fane took Honoria upstairs and opened a narrow wardrobe. Inside hung a plain ivory gown, carefully preserved, unfashionable by Mayfair's standards, and dignified by every better one. "Mine 30 years ago," Mrs. Fane said. "Altered twice. It will fit well enough. Pride should not make a woman poorly dressed for battle." Honoria touched the fabric. "I cannot take this from you. You are not taking it. You are making it useful again." At dusk, Honoria dressed without pearls, flowers, or ornament. Mrs. Fane fastened the last hook and handed her the repaired glove. "Wear it because it is yours, not because they made it famous." Honoria drew it on. The doubled seam lay visible along her thumb, not hidden, not copied, not borrowed. Downstairs, Lucian waited in the hall with his hat in hand. His eyes moved over the ivory gown, then stopped at the glove, then rose to her face. He did not praise her beauty. She was grateful for that. Beauty was too easy for rooms to steal. "You do not have to do this," he said. "Yes, I do. Then I won't ask you to be quiet so I may remain comfortable." The carriage ride to Mayfair passed beneath wet lamps and watchful windows. Calder House was already ablaze when they arrived, every pane bright with the confidence of people who believed they had arranged the ending. The footman opened the carriage door. Conversation glittered inside. Honoria stepped down before Lucian could offer his hand, then waited until he stood beside her, not ahead. Together with Mrs. Fane, she mounted the steps. The front door opened. Honoria Vale entered Lady Seraphina Calder's engagement dinner in a plain ivory gown, wearing the repaired glove from the portrait. The first silence belonged to the door. It opened. Honoria Vale crossed the threshold, and the glittering conversation inside Calder House lost its shape. Lady Seraphina Calder had arranged the dining room as a promise before anyone had made one. The long table shone with crystal, silver, and white roses. The candles were placed to flatter Rosamond's fair hair. At the head of the room, one chair beside Rosamond had been left vacant with such deliberate care that every guest knew whom it awaited. The Duke of Harrowmere had been given a place before he had accepted any claim upon it. Lady Bexham saw the empty chair, saw Lucian enter beside Honoria, and lifted her fan as if the evening had suddenly improved beyond expectation. Lord Giles Penrith stood near the mantel with a glass in hand and a smile too steady to be honest. Rosamond sat in pale blue silk, her right glove marked with the false seam, but her gaze fixed on Honoria's repaired one. Something passed through the girl's face, not yet courage, recognition. Lady Seraphina recovered first. "Miss Vale," she said. "How unexpected, Mrs. Fane." "Your Grace, we had feared the weather might detain you." Mrs. Fane removed one glove finger by finger. "The weather made no attempt to insult us, so we found the journey pleasant." A few smiles appeared and vanished. Lucian bowed with exact courtesy. "Lady Calder, your chair is here, Your Grace." Lady Seraphina indicated the place beside Rosamond. The movement was small, gracious, and as sharp as a hook. Lucian looked at the chair, then at the lower end of the table, where a place had been hastily added near the draught, no doubt for Honoria. "That arrangement is mistaken." Lady Seraphina's brows lifted. "Mistaken? Miss Vale is here as a guest. She will sit beside Mrs. Fane. I will sit where conversation requires less theatre." The footman hesitated. Lady Seraphina smiled through the correction. "Of course. Old habits of household arrangement can be difficult to undo. Then tonight is well timed for practice." The room heard it. Honoria did too. She allowed Mrs. Fane to guide her to the proper chair, neither hidden nor displayed. Lucian took the place across from her, not beside Rosamond. The empty chair lost its meaning before the first course was served. Dinner began because polite society survived scandal best with soup. For several minutes, Lady Seraphina spoke of music. Lady Bexham spoke of the season, and Sir Anselm Ford praised the quality of the silver as if forks might save the evening. Honoria ate little. Her repaired glove rested in her lap, not on the table, but its seam had already done its work. Guests looked at it, then at Rosamund's marked glove, then at the portrait-sized emptiness no one named. Lord Giles waited until the fish course had been removed. "Miss Vale," he said lightly. "London is astonished by your sudden rise from household assistants to dinner guest." Mrs. Fane looked up. "London is often astonished by good manners because it sees them so rarely." Lord Giles smiled. "I meant only that attention can be disorienting. A poor companion, an artist, a duke, a mysterious portrait. Such things invite confusion." Honoria met his gaze. "Confusion has been invited often in this house. I did not send the cards." A guest coughed into his napkin. Lady Seraphina's hand tightened around her glass. Lucian did not speak. He had promised not to stand in front of her voice, and for the first time in that room, his silence protected without possessing. Lord Giles leaned back. "Then let us be clear. Did you not stand for Mr. Wren?" "I stood by the window at Lady Calder's instruction, and developed an attachment to the result. I developed concern when my name was removed from it." The words dropped cleanly. Lady Bexam's fan stilled. Lady Seraphina gave a soft laugh. "My dear Miss Vale, household studies are not formal portraits. It was never a matter of your name." "Then why was it written on the first catalogue proof?" Rosamund flinched. Lord Giles's eyes narrowed. "A draft. Artists are untidy with sentiment." "Printers are less sentimental," Honoria said. "They remove names only when instructed." Lady Seraphina's voice cooled. "You speak with great confidence for someone who saw very little of the business." Honoria turned to her. "I saw enough to know the drawer was locked." For the first time, Lady Seraphina had no immediate answer. The room leaned closer. Lord Giles filled the gap with amusement. "How dramatic. A locked drawer, a mended glove, a stolen glance, perhaps a stolen sketchbook as well. One begins to wonder whether Miss Vale has mistaken private imagination for public injury." There it was. Honoria felt the stolen book enter the room before any page appeared. "You have mentioned my sketchbook, my lord. Have I?" "You have mentioned it too accurately for a man who should not know it is missing." The candles seemed to burn louder. Lord Giles's smile held, but his fingers shifted against the stem of his glass. "Many ladies sketch. Few have their books taken from private drawers by false messengers." Lady Seraphina rose half an inch from her chair, then forced herself back down. "This is an ugly accusation." "Yes," Mrs. Vane said. "The ugliness belongs to the act, not the naming of it." Lord Giles turned toward Rosamund, using her with his eyes before speaking. "Miss Calder, surely you can spare us this unpleasantness. You were present during Wren's work. You know how little Miss Vale mattered to the composition." Rosamund looked at her mother. Lady Seraphina's face commanded obedience. Then Rosamund looked at Honoria's glove. The repaired seam was real, doubled by patient stitches. Honoria had used that hand to save the sketches in the passage. Honoria had protected Rosamund at the earlier dinner, when one direct answer could have ruined her, before she had found the courage to deserve mercy. The girl's eyes filled, but she did not weep, not yet. "No," Rosamund said. Lady Seraphina went still. "Rosamund, no, Mama, I won't say that." Lord Giles's expression hardened. "You are overwrought." Rosamund stood, and the chair scraped softly behind her. "I was present sometimes. I did not sit for that figure. Miss Vale did. Mr. Wren asked for her because she understood the window. Mama told me no one would know." "You told me people would believe what was arranged prettily enough," Lady Bexam whispered. "Good heavens." Lady Seraphina's voice became silk, pulled tight. "My daughter is distressed by Miss Vale's performance." "I'm distressed because it's true," Rosamund said. Her voice shook, but it carried. Lord Giles said if His Grace pressed further, Miss Vale should be made to look improper. He said no one defends a woman once society makes her inconvenient. Honoria reached into her reticule and withdrew the torn scrap Agnes had brought. She held it out, not to Lucian first, but to the room. Then she placed it on the table. "This came from my sketchbook after it was taken from Mrs. Fane's house. The note beneath it is Lord Penrith's hand." Lucius lifted the scrap only after Honoria moved her hand away. He read aloud, his voice controlled enough to make each word colder. Useful. Suggest longing for Harrowmere before meeting him. Immodesty of imagination. A murmur spread. Lord Giles set down his glass. Private notes can be misunderstood. The private theft of a lady's sketchbook is quite clear, Lucian said. So is your intention to make an innocent drawing seem like pursuit? Lord Giles laughed once. Innocent? A companion draws your ancestral seat before meeting you, and you call it innocent? Your Grace is more romantic than London supposed. The insult was aimed at both of them. Honoria answered before Lucian could. I drew Harrowmere Palace from an old county volume years before I knew His Grace. I drew churches, windows, bridges, staircases, and houses I had no right to enter. Poverty does not make imagination immodest. The room stilled around her. Even Lady Bexham lowered her fan. Lucian looked at Honoria then, and though he said nothing, the quiet force in his face seemed to give the room back to her. Lady Seraphina tried to reclaim it. This has gone far enough. A dismissed companion, a frightened daughter, and a scrap of paper cannot outweigh the reputation of my house. Lucian rose. The movement ended every smaller sound. Your house used its reputation as a weapon. Do not complain when it is examined. Lady Seraphina turned toward him, desperate now beneath the polish. Surely, Your Grace, you will not permit your name to be attached to such a woman by idle scandal. The trap opened between them. Everyone saw it. If he denied Honoria too sharply, Lady Seraphina would win. If he claimed her too publicly, Honoria's restored name would be swallowed by his. Lucian did neither. My name is not the matter tonight. He stepped to Honoria's chair and stopped at a proper distance. Miss Vale's is. He turned back to the table. This is Miss Honoria Vale. She is the sitter whom Mr. Wren painted. She is the woman whose name was removed, whose poverty was mocked, whose private book was stolen, and whose dignity was treated as material for other people's advancement. She is not my secret. She is not Lord Penrith's scandal. She is not Lady Calder's inconvenience. She is herself. No applause followed. Applause would have made the moment too easy. Instead, shame moved slowly through the room, touching guest after guest, as they understood where they had placed their eyes. Rosamond sat down with both hands over her face. Lady Seraphina stood rigid beside her chair, abandoned for the moment by every phrase she trusted. Lord Giles bowed with poisonous grace. A stirring defense. What next, Your Grace? A proposal to make justice respectable. Honoria felt the room seize on the possibility. Lucian did not look away from her, but he did not speak to the room through her either. Justice is respectable before I touch it, he said. If society finds that insufficient, society may improve itself. Mrs. Vane murmured, an ambitious suggestion. A strained laugh broke from someone near the end of the table, and with it the spell of Lady Seraphina's control weakened. Lucian faced the room again. Tomorrow evening, Harrowmere House will hold a final viewing of The Woman at the Window. Mr. Wren will attend. My solicitor will present the original proof, the altered proof, the printer's account, and the relevant witnesses. Any person who repeated the lie may hear the truth before deciding which version they prefer to carry afterward. Lady Seraphina's lips parted. You cannot compel attendance. No, Lucian said. Curiosity will do what conscience has not. Chairs shifted. Fans opened. The guests were already imagining the next room, the next telling, the next reversal. Honoria knew then that the dinner had not ended the scandal. It had turned its direction. As they left, Rosamond came to her in the hall, pale and humbled. I'm sorry, she whispered. I should have spoken sooner. Honoria looked at the girl who had worn a false seam and finally removed part of the lie. Yes, she said, you should have. Rosamond lowered her head. Honoria added. But you spoke tonight. It was not forgiveness. It was a door left unbarred. Outside, the night air touched Honoria's face, colder and cleaner than the room behind her. Lucian stood beside the carriage, but did not offer his hand until she looked at him. May I? He asked. This time, Honoria placed her gloved hand lightly on his sleeve. Calder House blazed behind them, full of frightened light. a head-weighted Harrowmere house, the covered portrait, and the name that would no longer stay erased. By 6 o'clock the next evening, Harrowmere House had become the most disciplined scandal in London. Carriages rolled into the square in a polished line, bringing duchesses, countesses, art patrons, creditors disguised as gentlemen, and matrons who had spent the day declaring they would not attend before ordering their best gloves. Curiosity had dressed itself as moral concern and arrived early. In the long gallery, the woman at the window stood beneath a white veil at the far wall, guarded by 2 lamps, and a silence deeper than any canvas should have commanded. Honoria Vale entered with Mrs. Fane at her side. She wore the same plain ivory gown, freshly pressed, and the repaired glove. No jewels, no borrowed softness. If her name stood tonight, it would stand without ornament. Lucian met her near the gallery entrance, not before the crowd, but just inside the door where only she could hear him. You decide how much you wish to say. Honoria looked past him to the veiled painting, then to the guests who had come to see whether truth could be made entertaining. I know. His eyes held hers. I won't take the room from you. No, she said. You won't. That small agreement steadied her more than a vow would have done. Mr. Teague stood beside a narrow table, papers arranged in exact stacks. Elias Wren waited nearby, pale but resolved. Rosamond Calder had come in a dark blue gown, with no ornament in her hair. She stood apart from her mother. Lady Seraphina entered last, as if timing could still imply command. Lord Giles Penrith came beside her, smiling with the brittle brightness of a man determined to lie beautifully. The room settled when Lucian moved to the centre, then stopped beside Honoria rather than before her. You have been invited, he said, because a story was made public before it was made true. Tonight, the truth receives the same courtesy rumour was given. Lord Giles laughed lightly. Your Grace has a gift for ceremony. I hope the evidence proves as impressive as the setting. So do I, Lucian replied. It has waited long enough. He nodded to Teague. The solicitor lifted the first page. Original printer's proof for the exhibition catalogue, delivered to Lord Penrith's office 3 days before the Brook Street viewing. The sitter line reads, Miss Honoria Vale. Study for figure at window. Honoria heard her name travel through the gallery. Not whispered, not mocked, read. For a moment she was back in Calder House, watching Lord Giles draw ink through those letters. Then she was here, and the room had to hear what had been removed. Lady Bexham lowered her fan. Mr. Wren closed his eyes briefly, as if relieved to see paper doing what courage had feared to do. Teague lifted a second page. Altered proof. Same printer, same day. The sitter line is removed. Added wording inspired by a prophet study from Calder House. The alteration was delivered by Lord Penrith's servant and charged to Lord Penrith's account. Lord Giles spread one hand. Administrative convenience. Artists revise. Patrons simplify. Then we shall ask the artist, Lucian said. Wren stepped forward. His voice shook only at first. Miss Vale stood for the original study at Lady Calder's instruction. The sitting was proper. The drawing-room door was open. Several ladies were present. I wrote her name because the likeness was hers. No impropriety occurred, except the removal of that name afterward. A murmur moved through the guests. It did not sound like sympathy yet. It sounded like calculation changing sides. Lord Giles's smile thinned. Mr. Wren depends upon patrons. His memory may be grateful for future employment. Wren flushed. I have been poor, my lord. I have not been for sale in the way you suggest. Mrs. Fane said very clearly, a distinction some men never learn. Teague placed Lord Giles' note upon the table, then the torn scrap from Honoria's stolen sketchbook. A private note in Lord Penrith's hand. It proposes suggesting that Miss Vale sought attention from the painter, so sympathy would turn from her. The second note, written beneath a page torn from Miss Vale's sketchbook, reads useful, suggests longing for Harrowmere before meeting him, immodesty of imagination. Several guests drew back. A dealer who had been standing near Lord Giles stepped away, as if distance could cleanse association. Lord Giles saw it and lost colour. A sketchbook full of houses proves nothing. Honoria spoke before Lucian could. No, my lord. A sketchbook proves only that a woman had a private mind before society tried to make it evidence against her. Silence answered her, and this time it listened. Teague continued, but more briefly. A statement from Agnes Pike, formerly of Calder House, confirms that Miss Vale's glove was withheld, that the household was warned against speaking, and that Lord Penrith possessed pages from the sketchbook after it was taken from Mrs. Fane's house. Miss Pike has not been required to appear tonight, because truth does not need to humiliate a servant in order to be believed. Lady Seraphina moved at last. A maid's statement, a painter's gratitude, a companion's grievance. Is this what Harrowmere House calls proof? Rosamond stepped forward before her mother could recover the room. Mamma, stop. Lady Seraphina turned slowly. Rosamond, no. I won't let you place this on servants and artists. You told me no one would know. Lord Giles told me people would believe what was arranged prettily enough. Miss Vale was the woman in the portrait. I let the lie stand because I was afraid of disappointing you. Her voice broke, but she did not sit. That was cowardice. It was not innocence. Lady Seraphina's face hardened. I was securing your future. With someone else's name, Rosamond said. And someone else's shame. The room shifted, not dramatically. Worse for Lady Seraphina, quietly. Lady Bexham closed her fan and said to no one in particular, I believe my call at Calder House next week must be postponed indefinitely. Another lady, who had once begged Lady Seraphina for an introduction to Lord Giles, turned away from him and began speaking to Wren instead. The punishment had begun, and it wore gloves. Lucian faced Lord Giles. Harrowmere patronage is withdrawn from you tonight. Any printer, artist, dealer or patron under my protection will know why. Forged provenance and calculated slander are not mistakes of taste. They are loss of honor and loss of trust. Lord Giles's mouth twisted. You would ruin a man over a companion? Honoria looked at him. No, my lord. You ruined yourself when you decided a companion could be ruined safely. No one rescued him from the sentence. Lady Seraphina stood beneath the lamps with her chin lifted, but every glance she sought slid away. She had lived by rooms agreeing to her version of reality. Now the room declined. Lucian nodded to the footman. The veil was removed from the portrait. The woman at the window appeared in the lamplight. The repaired glove turned toward brightness, the face composed past sorrow. Beneath the frame, a brass plate waited, covered by a strip of white paper. Lucian did not touch it. He looked at Honoria, only if you wish. The choice was small and enormous. Honoria stepped forward, her gloved hand lifted. She removed the paper. The inscription beneath was plain. Honoria Vale, study for the woman at the window. Someone read it aloud. Then another. Her name moved through Harrowmere House, not as gossip, not as pity, but as record. Honoria placed the repaired glove on the small table beneath the portrait, beside the papers that had carried her name back into the room. Then let it bear the truth, she said. Lucian stood beside her, and for a moment she thought the evening had given all it could. Then he turned, not to the guests, but to her. His voice lost its public steel. Miss Vale, I owe you an apology before every person who heard me command what I had no right to command. I spoke once as if you were a woman to be brought, sheltered, or managed. I mistook urgency for care. I mistook power for protection. You corrected me. I am grateful you did. Honoria held herself steady, because tears would have made the room more comfortable, and she did not owe comfort. Your Grace, Lucian, he said quietly, then stopped, because this time he knew enough to leave space for refusal. She did not refuse. The portrait made me look. You taught me to see. If you ever choose to stand beside me, it must be because the place is yours by desire, not because scandal, gratitude, or my name corners you into it. No proposal could have been more dangerous, because it asked nothing publicly and offered everything honestly. Lady Bexham looked disappointed that no kneeling occurred. Mrs. Fane looked satisfied that it did not. Honoria looked at the brass plate. Her name had been restored before any promise. That mattered more than romance spoken in front of witnesses. I will not answer in this room, she said. A flicker of pain crossed his face before he mastered it. Of course, she turned back to him. But I will see Harrowmere Palace. Hope entered his face with careful restraint. Whenever you choose. Tomorrow, she said. Around them the room broke into whispers again, but the sound no longer owned her. Lady Seraphina stood abandoned by her own design. Lord Giles stared at the papers that had ended him. Rosamond wept quietly, not for display, and Honoria Vale walked out of the gallery under the full weight of her restored name, with the Duke of Harrowmere beside her, and no claim upon her except the choice she had not yet made. The next morning, Honoria Vale saw Harrowmere Palace from the North Road, where the carriage slowed beneath an avenue of elms, and the house rose beyond a rain-pale lawn, like a place society had exaggerated and still failed to understand. It was not a royal palace. Lucian had told her that before they left London, as if the distinction mattered now, because words mattered to her. It was an old ducal seat in Oxfordshire, enlarged by ancestors with more pride than restraint, its honey-coloured stone warmed by a shy sun, and its long windows catching light after a night of rain. Honoria sat with Mrs. Fane beside her, and Lucian opposite, his hat resting on one knee, his expression quiet enough to let the moment belong to her. No one told her to admire it. No one told her what it meant. The carriage wheels rolled over gravel, and for one sharp instant, she remembered Calder House, the back passage, the order to stand aside because she was catching the light. Here, the light touched her openly. Mrs. Fane looked through the window. It is very large. That isn't always a compliment. Lucian's mouth curved. I shall try not to let the architecture feel wounded. Honoria kept her gaze on the house. Why is it called Harrowmere Palace? Vanity, he said. My third great-grandfather thought hall too modest and castle too military. His heirs lacked the courage to correct him. And you? He looked at her then. I kept the name because I had never questioned what I inherited. The answer stayed with her as the carriage stopped before the entrance. A line of servants waited, formal but not theatrical. At their head stood Mrs. Alder, the housekeeper, dignified and grey-haired, with the quiet authority of a woman who knew a great house could not run on titles. Lucian presented Honoria plainly. Mrs. Alder, this is Miss Honoria Vale. Mrs. Alder curtsied. Miss Vale, you're welcome at Harrowmere Palace. Welcome. Not admitted, not tolerated. Welcome. Honoria lowered her eyes for 1 second, because the word needed room to settle. Inside, the great hall was high, cool, and filled with portraits of Mowbrays, who appeared to have mistrusted joy on principle. Honoria paused beneath a duchess in silver satin, whose painted hand rested on a closed book. She looks as though she wished to read it and was told to pose instead. Lucian glanced up. My grandmother disliked being interrupted. A sensible trait. You would have liked her, did you? The question surprised him. She saw it in the small pause before his answer. Yes. She taught me that authority without attention is merely noise. Honoria walked on, carrying that sentence into the East Gallery, where the portrait waited beside her own signed sketches. It did not hang in the great hall as a trophy. It stood among the work that had made it true. Windows, hands, a doorway. The imagined Harrowmere Palace drawn years before, with wrong proportions and honest longing for beauty rather than rank. Beneath the portrait, the brass plate bore her name. Lucian stopped several feet away. I thought this room might suit it better. Honoria looked at the morning light lying across the sketches. Because it is less grand? Because it belongs to the work, not to the conquest. She turned to him slowly. That he had used the word before she did move something in her that praise would not have touched. Beyond the gallery, he showed her a room with north light, shelves, a wide table, and blank walls. No flowers had been placed there, no ribbon. No stage had been made of her possible gratitude. It may be a studio, he said, or a sitting room, or nothing at all. I won't make a gift of a cage. Honoria stepped inside alone. The room smelled of clean wood, linen, and paper. A chair stood near the window, placed for work, not display. She touched the table, then looked back. You may come in. Lucian entered, and stopped where the light ended. I wanted you to have a place where no one asks whether you are allowed to remain. The words found the oldest wound without pressing on it. Honoria breathed once, carefully. I do not want to answer you today. Hope and restraint crossed his face together. Then don't. I need to know that this house is not another answer arranged for me. Then let it be only a house until you decide otherwise. Mrs. Fane, who had remained at the doorway, nodded. Better than most proposals I have heard, and I have heard many dreadful ones. Honoria almost laughed, and because the laugh came without being pulled from her, she trusted it. During the following weeks, she returned to Harrowmere Palace twice with Mrs. Fane, and once with Mr. Teague's papers spread before her in the London parlour. She read the marriage settlement herself. She asked questions about income, rooms, servants, patronage, and independence. Lucian answered each without impatience. When she moved the portrait farther from the centre of the East Gallery, he moved it. When she said the studio needed a locking cabinet for her own work, he ordered one and gave her the key unopened. When she proposed a small fund for poor gentlewomen with artistic talent, he did not call it charity. He asked how she wished it governed. Beyond their rooms, consequences arrived with the quiet cruelty society, usually reserved for the powerless. At Calder House, Lady Seraphina received 2 invitations returned unopened, and 1 note regretting a visit postponed without date. A creditor called in daylight and left through the front door rather than the service entrance, ensuring half the square noticed. Lord Giles Penrith presented his card at a gallery in Bond Street, and was told the owner was not at home, though the owner stood 10 feet away speaking to Mr. Wren. Rosamond left her mother's schemes more slowly than courage, in stories preferred, but she wrote to Honoria in a careful, humbled hand. When they met in Mrs. Fane's parlour, Rosamond held herself like a girl who had learned that shame could either rot or teach. "I'm sorry I borrowed your silence," she said. Honoria read the letter before answering. "I cannot give you the comfort of saying it did no harm, I know. But I can believe you mean to stop doing harm." Rosamond pressed a hand to her mouth and nodded. That was not forgiveness complete. It was a beginning, and beginnings had value when they did not demand applause. At the end of the 3rd week, Honoria stood in the North Light Room at Harrowmere Palace, with Lucian beside the table, and Mrs. Fane pretending to examine a shelf outside the open door. The studio had 1 locked cabinet, 1 clean easel, and no portrait of anyone watching over her shoulder. Honoria took the repaired glove from her reticule and laid it on the table. "I have considered everything." Lucian stood very still. "Have you?" "Yes. Your house, your name, your settlement, your temper. A severe inventory, a necessary one." His eyes warmed, though he did not move closer. "And your conclusion?" "I will marry you." Hope entered his face carefully, as if he feared sudden joy might startle her. "Because you wish to, because I wish to, because you learned to ask, because when my name was restored, you did not try to cover it with yours." He drew a breath. "May I take your hand?" Honoria gave it to him. His fingers closed around hers with warmth, restraint, and a reverence that asked for no more than what had been offered. "Then I will spend my life remembering the difference," he said. "You had better," Mrs. Fane called from the doorway. "I'm fond of correcting dukes, but I dislike repeating myself." They were married in the chapel at Harrowmere Palace beneath plain glass windows, with tenants, servants, a few London guests, Mr. Wren, Agnes Pike, Rosamond, Mrs. Fane, and Mr. Teague as witnesses. Lady Seraphina did not attend. No one asked why. Agnes cried through half the vows from her secure place in the Harrowmere household. Mr. Wren later received a commission that named his sitters properly. Mrs. Fane denied using her handkerchief, though Honoria saw the corner damp in her hand. Honoria became Duchess of Harrowmere without ceasing to be Honoria Vale. She learned the accounts, made mistakes without being made small, and opened the patronage fund with paper, pencils, instruction, and references no patroness could threaten to withdraw. The first recipient was a vicar's daughter from Kent, who expected pity and instead received materials. "Draw what you see," Honoria told her. "Then sign it before anyone else tells you what it means." The woman at the window remained in the East Gallery beside the sketches, not as Lucian's discovery, but as Honoria's record. Visitors often spoke of sorrow, restraint, and mystery. Honoria let them. Then she pointed to the studies around it and said, the painting was not the whole story. One early summer morning, she stood in the studio before a new canvas. Harrowmere Palace lay beyond the window, no longer a fable, no longer a command, but a home chosen with clear eyes. Lucian entered quietly and set a cup of tea on the table without interrupting her. He had learned that love often meant not speaking first. Honoria looked from the open doorway of the room to the waiting canvas and began to paint. This time, she did not start with a window. She painted the door, standing wide, with morning light crossing the threshold. When the first color settled, she signed the corner without hesitation. Honoria Vale Mowbray. Then, after a moment, she smiled and added beneath it the name that had survived before any title found her. Honoria Vale.